make it to this meeting. He sent his regrets. Just before we get started, I wanted to welcome everybody to this kind of rare, fully virtual planning meeting. And I hope everyone has a little bit of patience with how this all works. So I just wanted to give a very quick overview for members who have never been in a public meeting or planning meeting in this kind of context. When you would like to speak, please raise your virtual hand in Zoom, which is located just at the bottom of your screen if you are a member of the public, or if you are in as a member on the panel, it'll be on the right side of your screen at the bottom. And that just allows us to kind of cue who's going to speak, especially for members of staff. If you're wishing to speak, if you could turn on your cameras at that time, that's great as well. That goes, again, to members who are applicants or agents who are going to be presenting. For all those who are presenting a presentation, kindly let us know when you'd like the slide to be changed, as the meeting host has control over the presentation during the active time of the slides. And it's helpful to just a gentle prompt so we can keep the meeting going. Other than that, it should be pretty nice and easy going this afternoon. So I will hand it over to you, Councillor McLaren, to get the meeting started. Thank you.
Thank you. I officially call this meeting to order, and I will read the notice of collection. Personal information collected as a result of the public meetings are collected under the authority of the Planning Act and will be used to assist in making a decision on this matter. Persons speaking at the meeting are requested to give their name and address for recording in the minutes. All names, addresses, opinions, and comments may be collected and may form part of the minutes, which will be available to the public. Additionally, interested members of the public can email the committee clerk or the assigned planner if they wish to be notified regarding a particular application. Questions regarding this collection should be forwarded to the Director of Planning Services. The first portion of tonight's meeting is to present planning applications in a public forum as detailed in the community report. This report does not contain a staff recommendation, and therefore no decisions will be made this evening. Each application in the community meeting report will be presented individually, and following each presentation by the applicant, the meeting will be open to the public for comments and questions. The second portion of tonight's meeting is to present a planning application in a public meeting held under the Planning Act. This report does not contain a staff recommendation, this meeting does not contain a staff recommendation. Following a presentation by the applicant, the meeting will be open to the public for comments and questions. The third portion of tonight's meeting is to consider a public meeting reports. These reports do contain a staff recommendation, and the recommendation is typically to approve with conditions or to deny. After the planner's presentation, committee members will be able to ask questions of staff, followed by members of the public. Following the question and answer period, this committee then makes the recommendation on the application to City Council, who has the final say on the application. Following Council's decision, notice will be circulated in accordance with the Planning Act. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston to the Ontario Land Tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submissions at public meetings or make written submissions to the City of Kingston before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. So the first one, the community meeting. The purpose of a community meeting is to provide the applicant with an opportunity to present a potential development proposal in the early stages of development process, and to seek feedback from the public and members of planning committee before a complete application is submitted to the city. Anyone who attends a community meeting may present an oral submission and or provide written submissions on the proposals being presented. So Exhibit A, first one, address 47 and 67 Village Drive. We will now look for the applicant's presentation, please.
Well, good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Committee, and members of the public and staff. My name is Michael Keane, and I'm a land use planner with Foten Consultants, located at 4 Cataraqui Street in Kingston in the Woolen Mill, Suite 315. And this evening, I'm here with my colleague, Tyler Hamilton, who's a planner, and I'm also joined by Greg Jones, who is the president of SkyDev Co., and also Sarah Reeve, who is the development manager at SkyDev as well. And I have a few slides, and then Greg is going to jump in with a few slides about Skydev, because they are a developer that you have not heard from before in the city of Kingston. So they have a few points to discuss with committee and public to tell you a little bit about themselves and their company. But my focus will be on the planning application that is before this committee. And overall, we'll keep this to as close to 10 minutes as possible. Next slide, please. So the proposal before the committee tonight is for a zoning bylaw amendment for the address 47 and 67 Village Drive. And you can see the location of the property on the screen, which is located directly abutting the new crossing and south of John Counter Boulevard, east of Montreal Street. Next slide, please. This is zooming in a little closer on the site, and as many would know, there's been so much change in this area with the completion of the crossing and the completion of the upgrading to John Counter Boulevard, that the aerial imagery doesn't even show the new road, the new loop road that exists at this location that helps to connect the existing business at the corner of Montreal and John Counter. And the proposal where the star is located on the image is for a new apartment building to join the two existing apartment buildings on the site. Next slide, please. This is an image of the existing conditions, and this is a photo taken by my colleague Tyler. And he's standing on the sidewalk, essentially where the new traffic light is, where the new loop road connects the existing properties in this area. And you can see the existing apartment buildings and the existing storage building on the left side of the photo. Next slide, please. Just looking at another existing condition photo, and this is a photo taken from the new loop road, looking into the site, looking at the front of the building, essentially where the front of the building will be located, fronting on this new loop road. Next slide, please. This is now just zooming in a little closer to the site, looking at the two existing apartment buildings and the existing storage building that is proposed to be removed as part of this application. Next slide, please. So in focusing on the designation on the property, this is a residential designation, which is represented by the yellow color on the screen. And the Cataraqui River is green, recognizing its environmental significance. And you can also see that the lands on the south of my client's property also have that same environmental protection designation, directly abutting Bell Park to the south of the property. So in these residential designations, we are permitted to have a range of residential uses. And this is a stable neighborhood. So there are a series of policies that had to be tested to add in another tall building into the mix on this site. Next slide, please. So this is the first image of the proposed building, an artist rendering prepared by SRM Architects, who are the designers of the building. And this is crossing to the west, going across the bridge to the west, and you can see the two existing buildings are whited out so that the focus is on the new 12-story building that's before the committee. Next slide, please. So just want to speak a little bit about the project. It is a 12-story building, and you can see in this image the new loop road that exists. And on the right side of the photo, the whited out taller box is actually another Skyline property just farther up the road at John Counter Boulevard. And there's the commercial intersection just kind of blurred out in between that, the corner of Montreal and John Counter. And this image gives you the sense of the 12-story building in context beside the 9 and the 10-story buildings that exist on the site. And there's a step at the 10th floor, and then it steps up 2 more floors for the 11th and 12th floor. Next slide, please. This is now looking at the building head on, as if you were standing on John Counter Boulevard and looking head on at the building with the new loop road, which is actually the name of that road if you're not familiar with this new road. That's the name of the road, and looking at the building with the existing buildings behind it. Next slide, please. This is now looking at the site internally, and you can see the 9 and 10-story existing buildings, the parking lot. The center of this site would really be that existing storage building that is being removed, and this building will then frame the site with the new loop road and helping to enclose that parking area. And just to give you a few additional statistics about the project, 47 Village Drive is the building that is the closest one on the right side of the image, and that is a 10-story building, and it has 114 dwelling units in it. The other white building, existing building, is 9 stories, address 67 Village Drive, and that has 105 units. The new building, which is proposed at 12 stories, has 135 units. Next slide, please. So just adding to some of those statistics and giving you a bit more of a breakdown, there is a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units, 31 1-bedroom units, and 104 2-bedroom units. The total units on the site is 354 when you combine the existing buildings with the new proposed building. Next slide, please. There's a wealth of amenity space on this property, and all of the buildings have both private amenity in existing balconies, and then there's the pretty vast amount of green space that surrounds the building. The new building will also enjoy a terrace on that roof of the 10th floor, and there will be 2 amenity rooms that access that terraced space as well, which will be a nice addition for the residents of the new building. And you can see the series of private balconies that they will enjoy as well. Overall, the site is proposed to contain 290 parking spaces, which is a ratio of roughly 0.8 parking spaces per unit. If you've been to the site now, you'll know that is certainly enough spaces to accommodate the users that exist on the property today. The building proposes bicycle parking, and it's on that first floor. So a lot of the utility of this building is on the first floor of the building, so it will be in building and protected. And right now the city is currently, city staff, I should say, are currently reviewing the planning application that is before the committee this evening. Next slide, please. So you'll be familiar with the fact that Kingston has a number of zoning bylaws, and this property was subject to the former 8499 bylaw, the older bylaw, because it has site-specific zoning on it, recognizing the 2 existing apartment buildings. Next slide, please. So part of our proposal, in addition to bringing this new building to the site, is to bring this property into the new zoning bylaw. And so we are proposing to bring it into an urban residential zone with special provisions that will regulate everything from the separation from water, the parking spaces, the height, and the setbacks. And one of the key points, which is a kind of a strange provision, or might be considered a strange provision, is this idea of a maximum number of buildings on a lot. Typically, we zone for 1 building at a time. So this is 1 property with 3 buildings, 2 buildings plus the one that's proposed. So we need to allow 3 principal buildings on this property. Next slide, please. So in summary, this is an infill project. This is an existing site with apartment buildings on it. The new proposed building will be set back 80 meters from the adjacent townhouses. And 80 meters is from the rear property line of the townhouses to the front door of the newly proposed building. So vastly set back from those medium density uses to the north. And so as a result of this being quite an isolated site, we're not anticipating that there will be any adverse impacts on neighbors. We've done a cultural heritage study because there are some nearby cultural heritage properties. We're not anticipating impacts to those. And overall, this is a good use of the site to increase the density on the property by adding this additional apartment building. So it's my opinion that the project's consistent with provincial policy and the general intent of the official plan. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Greg Jones, president of SkyDev, who's going to tell you a little bit about their company. Turn it over to you, Greg.
Well, hi there, Mr. Chair, members of committee, general public, planning staff, technical staff. It's a pleasure to be before you this evening. We're hoping to be there in person, but this is the next best thing. My name is Greg Jones. I'm the president of SkyDev. SkyDev is the development management company in the Skyline group of companies. We are delivering 600 rental apartments just this year in the province of Ontario. We're hoping to invest further in the city of Kingston. SkyDev is part of the Skyline group of companies, which owns and manages over 20,000 rental apartments across Canada and 57 communities, including Kingston, across 8 provinces. I guess just a quick point of clarification. We do have a complete application submitted under the previous planning framework, but we're before you today under the new planning framework to present to the public and engage the public and engage yourselves. And myself and Sarah are here to answer any kind of business or non-planning related questions that might come up. It's our pleasure tonight to present to you a zoning amendment proposal that will change our site from a multi-residential zone to the current bylaw and another multi-residential zone with a new building to provide much needed rental housing to the people of Kingston. It's something the planners can't talk about because you can't say what the tenure is, but I can, and it's rental. We are a rental housing provider. Oh, sorry, I should prompt next slides. So there's the Skyline slide, but what we do, how much is under management. Here's the concept site plan from the aerial view. You can see where the building's situated, not in I mean, all the things before you are conceptual. Next slide, please. Wanted to say we're a rental housing provider that believes communities we serve are the backbone of our success. In the city of Kingston, we've seen extremely low vacancy rates, less than 1.5%, that speak to a critical need of housing supply, and which translates into a significant affordability issue that's been exacerbated by the pandemic, which is even harder with interest rates changing and construction costs changing. In fact, Kingston has had the lowest vacancy rates in the province for a number of years. Next slide, please. We build rental housing that's attainable for the average person who lives and works in a community with a mindset to implement sustainable technologies. Essentially, when you own and manage your own buildings for decades, as seen in the existing property, but also the ones you see on John Counter, it makes sense to incorporate these long-term technologies such as solar and low flow showers and efficient appliances and efficient lighting, because it's good for the planet. It saves the people that live there, and it saves on our common costs as well. And it's just more affordable and better for the environment. With a mix of different apartment sizes and no down payment for rentals, our investment in a community represents new supply to serve a critical need of housing, deemed essential both provincially and nationally lately. Just more rental housing. How do we make more? And we're hoping to achieve that on this property by taking a already zoned multi-residential site and proposing another multi-residential building. Next slide, please. So we create good quality amenity spaces. There's an existing pool and playground there. There's some neat trails on the waterfront. We always incorporate a common room, gyms, yoga areas, community gardens, ample bicycle parking, often pickleball courts and dog runs, trying to cater to the activities the people that live there need. So to the committee and members of the public, Skyline's before you tonight proposing a rental housing opportunity for the people of Kingston on a site where we already own and manage rental apartments during a housing crisis. We appreciate this opportunity to engage with the committee and the members of the public to answer questions you have. Again, as I said, happy to answer any kind of business or non-planning related items with Sarah, and Michael's before to answer any planning related items.
Thank you. That was very good. So now we will move on to questions and comments from the public. And for anybody who wishes to speak, we have 5 minutes. We would like you to give your name and your address at the beginning, and then we will answer any and all questions at the end of that. Mr. Clerk, are there any people who wish to speak?
So I can see that my colleague Blair is saying yes. So what we're going to do going forward as well throughout the rest of this meeting is we will first look to Memorial Hall, just so there are about 5 members of the public there, and then we will go to the members in the public viewing gallery on Zoom. So if we can have the members in the Memorial Hall.
I could have gone in public. I could have gone there. I booked hotel rooms and I had to cancel them, and I don't get them back.
Through you, Mr. Chair, no. So unfortunately, this is only for the members of the public due to the change of the things in the chamber, just for extraordinary circumstances. So if we could have the first member of the public from the Memorial Hall, please state their name and their address, please, and go ahead with your comments.
If the person is speaking, we are not hearing anything.
Yes, hello, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
It's Frank Dixon speaking from the anteroom of Memorial Hall on this item. So my address is apartment 2, 495 Alfred Street, K7K 4J4. Thanks to the presenters for the presentation. I visited the site earlier this week and took a look at the proposal from that standpoint. And now I've heard the presentation. So based on what I've seen, I'm supportive of the proposal. And just have a couple of points. This one question is, what is the separation between the location of the proposed new building and the existing closest building that's apparently 10 stories tall? That wasn't dealt with in the presentation. Second question is, how many existing parking spaces service the 2 buildings on the site, and how many new parking spaces are going to be installed? These are all on the surface, right? There's no underground parking. And my third question is, I'm just wondering if there's going to be any solar energy potentially generated in the new proposal. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Frank. Is there anybody else at Memorial Hall?
I believe he's turned it off, so I don't believe any more from Memorial Hall. If there are any members of the public in the public viewing gallery on Zoom, if you would like to speak, please raise your virtual hand. And I am not seeing any movement, Mr. Chair.
Wonderful, then we will move to the committee. Does any member of the committee have any questions or comments on this file? Councillor Sanik.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you, thanks very much for your presentation, Mr. Keene. You always do such a thorough job and cover out basis. And thank you for your your introduction and whatnot, Mr. Jones. So, Mr. Jones, I'm so happy to hear that these are going to be apartments and not condos. We haven't had an application for an apartment for a while. And so I'm really excited. This is going to be another apartment. So right now you manage also the other two buildings on the site, like 47 and 67 Village Drive, like you manage both of them right now as well. Is that it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we manage those buildings as well as the John Counter buildings, Skyline. The apartment REIT owns and manages the buildings that they operate, and we're looking to intensify with more rental housing. And the point of tenure is not a planning matter, and that's why I was hoping to speak today.
Great. Yeah, well, thank you for providing rentals and for thinking about providing more rentals in Kingston, because like you said, that is exactly what we need as opposed to condos. So thank you so much for that. My only question is, maybe I had two questions. So right now it's being proposed 12 stories. There's no chance that you could go even taller than 12 stories to provide more units?
To you, Mr. Chair, we're just trying to right size the building based on the existing parking that's there and trying to make sure we don't go too much lower than 0.8 parking spaces per unit. And could we provide more? Sure. Also trying not to be the tallest building in Kingston either, and trying to be fitting in the area and check every single planning box, because you got heritage properties over there, you got Parks Canada over there, you got to answer someone else's question indirectly, the Ministry of Environment. We have a record of site condition on the site already that doesn't allow us to go below grade, so we have to do surface parking and we can't go underground because of that environmental condition. So we're very much trying to get the most possible with this current property. We have investigated the other properties we own, but just planning policy hair all over them.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. We do have some buildings that are taller that are in construction right now, like 23 stories even, and usually it has all the concerns of the existing homes in that vicinity and or it being right downtown. Whereas with this one, it's, you know, you've got the waterfront view, right? And if you go higher, even more people would be able to enjoy the view of the Cat River, and you have the sunset on the west side of the building. Like there's so much, I love Village Drive, like there's so much potential. It's so pretty, and now we have the Waban crossing, and it's just such a great site, you know. So that's why I just wanted to throw out that question at 12 stories, because objections for going taller that we see in other sites wouldn't really apply to this site. But if you have a parking constraint, then parking's important too. I can understand that. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And then the only other question I have, Mr. Chair, is I did see that some trees have to be taken down. Now, I'm pretty sure the trees in that corner are like small anyway, but if you are replanting trees for the trees you're taking down, if it's at all possible to provide like a means where they have the best chance of survival, so they could become big mature trees at one time. So I know that with Bill 23, the cities can't dictate, or planning committee council can't dictate landscape plans anymore, you know, but if there's any way to ensure watering of those trees, you know, for those few couple of crucial years for heat waves that we're going to be getting every summer, that would be most appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh,
to Mr. Chair, we are planting more trees than we're removing. Care about our property. We want them to live. We're looking at good pedestrian connections to the waterfront and along the waterfront with planning staff. We're excited about that. Indirectly, the comments about height, like, yeah, we love taller buildings, but as soon as you go taller than 12, then you're into a smaller floor plate and you get less units, and the general public gets upset, and we just simply can't afford to build rental housing with a whole bunch of these planning challenges. We need to hit the easy button and say, what will the Ministry of Environment approve? What will the Parks Canada like? What will the Heritage Committee like? What would the general public be okay with based on buildings in the area, and what works with the parking? We're truly trying to build normal housing for normal people. And that's why it's a modest application before you.
All right. Well, thank you. I wish you all the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to have to apologize to Councillor Shaves. I made a mistake and forgot to let the answers to Frank Dixon's questions. So if I could ask the planner or whomever to answer Mr. Dixon's questions, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Dixon, for your questions. And we would have made sure we answered Mr. Dixon's questions one way or the other tonight. And they were very specific questions related to existing parking versus proposed. So right now, the property has a surplus of parking on it. It has 327 spaces, which is almost like 2 spaces per unit right now on the existing situation. So the new proposal, even though we're tearing down the one building and adding one, parking will be reduced to 290 parking spaces, which is still a ratio of 0.8, which is well within the city's normal requirements these days when you're not in a downtown core. The question was also asked with respect to what's the separation of the existing building to the newly proposed one. And it's approximately 16 meters between the closest 9-story building and the newly proposed building. And I believe that does answer Mr. Dixon's questions. Oh, there was the question about solar energy, and you know, I don't know if Greg wants to jump in, but I mean, it's also something we can address. We can consider and look at site plan. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Greg.
Oh, it'd be my pleasure to the chair, the committee, and Mr. Dixon. It's definitely our intent to add solar. What we'd like to do, though, is get the provision in the bylaw to be allowed to have accessory solar on the roof, and we design it structurally to be able to hold the solar on the roof, and the electrical system set up. We call it solar ready. We generally don't put it that it's a requirement in our bylaws or site plan, and we follow up as a retrofit application to add the solar after to obtain the government grants of a retrofit solar installation.
Thank you. Councillor Shaves, go ahead.
Thank you. Before I start on my questions, I wanted to sort of further on an answer you get in regards to parking. You say currently there's over 300 parking spaces now, which is basically double what's needed for the 2 locations, 2 current buildings. So my question is, when the new building goes in and number of parking spaces will go down, is anyone in the 2 current buildings going to lose parking? Because apparently there must be some that are maybe using 2 parking spaces.
So through you, Mr. Chair, no, I don't know if you've been to the site. There's very little parking actually taken up by their current tenants in the building right now. And the newer building will definitely add to that parking need. But right now there is a very high surplus of parking on the site, so much so that there's no assigned parking. So there's even possibly people that are parking there that aren't related to the site because they just know they can. So there's that much parking. It's not even regulated right now. As the new building comes in, that might be something that has to be considered. But it's still at a 0.8 ratio. It's still almost 1 space per unit, and quite high and reasonable in an apartment in the Kingston context.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Okay, so going back to my questions, I noticed there are 1 and 2 bedroom units. So there's no actually family units such as 3 bedrooms going in?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. These are smaller units, but mostly the 2-bedroom units, more so than the 1-bedroom units in this case. But there aren't 3-bedroom units in this building.
Okay. And I think I noticed this in one of your drawings, but I'm going to ask anyways to confirm. Where will the outdoor terrace be facing? I believe it's on the 10th floor.
Correct. So through you, Mr. Chair, it's facing east, so it's facing the river.
Okay.
And it's on that step in the building. That's where it is.
I didn't see that in the report, but in your presentation, I thought that's where I noticed it. There are there is a lot of open space, which would allow for extra trees. I know Mr. Jones already mentioned that, but would be there any possibility of actually adding more trees to your current proposal?
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly. And I think there's also, we're working on the technical comments with staff. There's also parkland dedications that will be part of this. So the actual lot fabric will change by the time this project reaches some form of approval. So the whole way this site connects with Bell Park, public land versus private land, landscaping is going to be a drastic improvement over what's there today.
Okay. I also noticed one of your slides, that apparently on the loop road, there may be some trees that don't look all that healthy. I'm not sure if that's your responsibility. Are you planning on replacing those?
So I'd have to look at the slide again, but yeah, like the loop road is actually a city road. So the
Okay.
loop road is actually City of Kingston land. So the front of our building will be roughly 4.5 meters from that road allowance. So there is room certainly on our end to put some new trees in, but I actually believe those other trees are not SkyDev trees. And if they are, because we're going to be right close to that front line, we're going to have to replace them if there are a few there that aren't bad. And I see Mr. Jones might be able to add a point to this.
Oh, I just wanted to point out, as part of the crossing, there's a huge section of land that was expropriated from us a few years back that is going to become a public park adjacent to this new development that will also have trees.
That's nice to know. And I guess I'll have to speak to a different department in regards to those trees. You mentioned, I noticed this in your slides, you're very environmental active, but in the report, I didn't notice anything about EV parking, even though in your presentation it was stated. So will there be EV parking and any car sharing spaces?
Sorry, you're muted, Greg, if you want to add to that.
Pardon me. Counselor, I guess I missed the start of the meeting. Are you the chair as well, Mr. Chair?
No.
You're not the chair. Okay, so through the chair, we do add EV chargers set to the current demand. And what we do is we size our electrical service to be able to accommodate 100% EV, such that over time, as the demand increases, we're not caught without the power to provide it to them. The technology does change quickly. There's a little bit of daisy chain electrical setups going on and time of day charging and all sorts of things. But we generally start with kind of 3 or 4 EV chargers and kind of put the infrastructure in to ramp up as the demand comes in.
Okay, thank you. Like I said, I didn't see it in the report, so I just thought I'd ask here. I was still in the thinking stage. And going back to the green space which you do have you thought about maybe having a community garden for the residents?
Through the chair, absolutely. We generally put community gardens on in close lot line situations, we'll put them on the rooftop, but in this situation, we'll have community gardens in the landscaped areas. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And final, and probably the biggest question. I know you mentioned some, but what are some of the other aspects you might be doing to try to get to net zero?
Through the chair, I guess net zero is an arbitrary question. Some people define it as energy net zero. Some people define it as carbon net zero. We very much want to proceed with any initiative that saves our tenants money and investors money and saves the environment. And we look at solar, and we have net metering, and we have battery backups, and we'd love to incorporate a lot of that energy. In terms of carbon, it is a concrete building, and it's probably not carbon zero.
Okay, just that we have declared a climate crisis here in Kingston a few years ago, so I just want to inquire what steps that developers were doing to keep it going.
So through the chair, low flow showers, low voltage lighting, solar, electric. We do not have enough land to make a big enough solar grid to make it 100% sustainable electric. We are connecting to the Kingston grid We essentially try to do everything possible from a practical standpoint but not so far as to make a housing crisis, which we also have, and rents that are unaffordable to the average person in the area. So it's a bit of a balance.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else from the committee? Okay, seeing none, I will declare this community meeting closed and we will move on to the public meeting. Thank you all. The following is a report to the Planning Committee to facilitate a statutory public meeting regarding a city-initiated application for a zoning bylaw amendment with respect to properties that are identified as, quote, not subject to this bylaw, unquote, or NA, in Kingston zoning bylaw number 2022-62. These include properties with older site-specific exceptions that predate the official plan and were labeled as red exceptions as described in report number 21-267. Staff have been reviewing these red exemptions against the policies of the official plan, and the intent is to proactively amend Kingston zoning bylaw number 2022-62 to bring as many properties as possible under jurisdiction of the Kingston zoning bylaw number 2022-62 as time and staff resources permit. The purpose of this amendment is to transfer 25 such properties from the former zoning bylaws into Kingston zoning bylaw number 2022-62 and introduce exceptions for 8 of the properties in order to carry forward existing site-specific permissions. Through an amendment to bylaw number 2006-75, a bylaw to designate various planning approvals to staff and to adopt certain procedures for the processing of planning applications subject to delegated authority, Council delegated the approval of amendments carrying forward permissions for red exemptions into Kingston zoning bylaw number 2022-62 to the Director of Planning Services where the property owner does not contest the amendments. So may we start with the staff presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair, for the excellent introduction. So my name is Shanti Birdie. I am an intermediate planner with the City of Kingston, and I will be presenting this city-initiated zoning bylaw amendment tonight. Thank you, members of the committee, members of the public, both online and in Memorial Hall today. Thank you for your time tonight. Slide, please. So we'll jump right into it. So what is the purpose and effect of this amendment? So as I mentioned, this is a city-initiated zoning bylaw amendment. The purpose is to bring 25 properties that are currently subject to former zoning bylaws into the new zoning bylaw, as well as apply 7 new exceptions to 8 properties through this process as well. So just a little bit of clarity on the numbers that you'll see in this presentation and that you would have reviewed in the report. When we talk about number of properties, we're talking about the number of individually conveyable properties. So on the key maps, you'll see that there's actually 19 sites. Those are the former zones. However, there's multiple properties on some of these sites. So for example, 129 Van Order Drive, there's actually 2 properties that are subject to 1 former zone. So in case you're wondering about the numbers, there's 19 sites that we're talking about today. So 19 former zones, but there's actually 25 properties in total. And then we are proposing 7 exceptions, which consist of 8 properties. And we will move on to a table that breaks them down for you as well. If these amendments are proposed, these properties will no longer be subject to the former zoning bylaws and will be fully applicable to the current zoning bylaw. So the chair provided a really good summary of the red exceptions project, but just to reiterate, the reason that these properties are not currently subject to Kingston zoning bylaw 2022-62 is at the time of the development of that bylaw, there were a number of properties that had site-specific zoning, very similar to the Village Drive site that we actually just looked at. And so the exceptions, or the site-specific zones that were passed under the former official plan needed more review to ensure that they were consistent with our current official plan, because in the planning world, we have our hierarchy of documents. We need our zoning bylaw to be consistent with our official plan, which has to be consistent with the provincial policy statement. So in order for the new zoning bylaw to move forward, what we did is we identified these 1,000-some properties as NA, and they continue to be subject to the former zoning bylaws. Now, one of the benefits of bringing these older properties into the new zoning bylaw is that some of our new and updated policy will apply. So for example, some of our parking changes, our bike parking regulations, our floodplain regulations, when we bring these properties over, the new bylaw will apply, which is our more recent policy. Slide, please. So I do want to reiterate there's no development proposed as part of these amendments. So this is strictly a zoning exercise at this time. However, once we bring these properties into the new zoning bylaw, any future development would be subject to the new bylaw. So generally, when we have a zoning bylaw amendment, we would come to the committee for a review, and then a recommendation would be brought to council. This process does have what's called delegated authority. So council passed a specific permission for the Director of Planning Services to transfer properties from the old bylaws into the new bylaws, subject to a couple of provisions. So for example, we are still required to give the required notice under the Planning Act, and that has been done, including today's statutory public meeting, which is required to allow both the public and property owners to engage with us if there are any concerns. The proposed amendments must be consistent with the current official plan, and the property owners must not contest in order for this to process through the delegated authority. So there is one piece of correspondence that was received today, and it has been included in your addendum to the agenda package. Now, this letter is not indicating a contestant, or it's not objecting to the amendment. However, there were questions raised about the property at the Kingston Center. So 97 to 151 Bath Road, as well as 1036 to 1062 Princess Street, which is the Kingston Center. So because there were a number of questions raised, and we want to make sure that the applicant and the owner are fully aware of what the changes could lead to, and so they can make an informed decision on whether or not they want to object, we will not be including this specific property in the recommendation to the director at this time. We will meet with the owner first, address their questions, and then bring that property forward at a later date. And we can talk a little bit about that in the next step slides. But before we get there, I just wanted to mention that we did follow the required public notice under the Planning Act. And we also included a courtesy notice to each property owner to ensure that they're aware of the changes and to allow opportunity to reach out to us. So at this time, there is only the one property that is being exempt from this amendment. But if in theory we received more objection tonight, we would do the same thing where we would just bring those properties back at a later date. All right, slide please. So I have a couple of slides here that are going to highlight the changes at a very high level. Obviously, when you're moving bylaws, there's quite a few different implications. But the chart that I have here for you today is just a really high level summary, and it also shows you the location of the properties. So sites 1 to 5, you'll see that a lot of them are in the commercial designation in the official plan. So we have mostly assigned commercial loans to them. Slide, please. So in this batch here, you'll see that there's a little bit of a mix of commercial and residential. So this is in the area of Bath Road and Portsmouth. And you might be wondering, how are we choosing the direction we're moving? What we've done for this first batch is we've chosen sites that are a little bit more straightforward, as this is a new process. I mentioned briefly earlier that there's about 1,000 of these properties that are going to need this amendment. So what we've done is we've chosen 25 that are geographically in close proximity to each other so that we can map them a little bit easier and make it a little bit easier for you to see on the screen. So you'll see where we have a residential designation, we also have a residential zone. The previous slide and this slide, you'll see that there's no exceptions being proposed. I have a separate chart coming in a few slides that'll go over the exceptions. So I'll get you to go to the next slide, please. So sites 10 to 13, you'll see that site 12 is highlighted. That's the Kingston Center. So I've included it here in the chart because it was in the report. But as I mentioned, because the owner did have some questions, we are not going to be having a recommendation for it to the director at this time. You'll also notice in this chart, we're starting to get some exceptions, and I'll get into a little bit more detail in a couple of minutes. Slide, please. Thank you. And so sites 14 to 19. So this is the last slide that talks about just the regular zones that we're assigning. You'll see site 14 is highlighted. The reason I've highlighted it is because the recommendation that will be going to the director is slightly different than what was presented in the report based on further staff review. So in your report, you'll see reference to expansion, extension, and alteration of an existing dwelling unit. What we've done is we've even further simplified it to simply state that, and you'll see this in the next slide, but to simply state that a dwelling unit is permitted on the second story and leave it at that. So we've just simplified it. So we can go into the next slide, and this is where we're getting into those exceptions. So just for a little bit of context, so what we're doing is we're taking these properties, we're assigning them a new zone. Once they have that new zone, what we're doing is we're taking a look at what site-specific zoning they had before and what can be carried over and what should be carried over. So the first site that we have here, site 10, so 111 to 129 Van Order Drive. In the former site-specific zone, there were a number of permissions, including a maximum residential density, as well as a maximum number of dwelling units. What we've done here is we've simplified it down and said your maximum number of dwelling units is 160. In other cases, for example, 1011 to 1043 Princess Street, you'll see we've maintained previous permissions for height and use. So these are not new permissions. They're permissions that would have been received through previous zoning bylaw amendments, and they're just being carried forward as long as they're still consistent with the official plan designation. So slide. And then these are the last of the exceptions as well. So you'll notice if you're looking at the former site-specific zones and the current proposals, that there's quite a few less exceptions and permissions. And so part of that reason is a lot of these properties are on our arterial commercial. For example, 1334 Princess. I won't use that one because I'm not sure that's actually the one. It could be 1330 or 1334. In the former site-specific zone, they had permission for a restaurant. In this new zoning bylaw, the zone itself already allows that, so there's no need for an extra permission. So we've actually been able to take these 25 properties and really scale back what extra permissions are needed, because a lot of the previous permissions are now permitted under the new zoning bylaw. And I think this really speaks to just the change in the areas over time. Whereas before you had to get permission to have a restaurant, today you don't. So that summarizes the exceptions that are being proposed. And so we'll just talk generally about next steps. So if I can get the slide, please. So all the amendments that are being proposed today, both the base zone as well as the exceptions, are consistent with both the provincial policy statement, the PPS, and the official plan. The zone provisions have been developed both in the underlying zones and the exceptions to be appropriate for the areas, and they represent good planning. Slide, please. So in terms of next steps, as I mentioned, these amendments are being processed through the delegated authority process. So following this meeting, we would present the director with a memo outlining our recommendations, and they would have the authority to approve those. We are still required to give notice of passing as per the Planning Act requirements. And we do accept requests to be notified if you are not an owner. You can still request to be notified of the decisions of these amendments. So with that, I will turn it back to the chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions that there may be. Thank you.
Thank you. So first we will go to the public. Is there anybody from the public that would like to speak to these properties?
So Memorial Hall, is there anyone that wishes to speak to this?
Yes, we have one.
All right. So just for everyone, it does take about a minute for my colleague to guide them to the other computer. So I'll just do the spiel as well for those that are online. If you would like to speak to this item, please raise your virtual hand in Zoom, because then after the one person in Memorial Hall is done, we can move right on to your comments as well. So we'll just give whoever wishes to speak a moment to get to the computer. Thank you.
Okay, it's Frank Dixon speaking from the ante room of Memorial Hall. Gave my address information earlier. Thank you to staff for the presentation. I have 4 points I wish to make. I'm just wondering if this process has been staff directed, owner directed, or a combination of both. I'm wondering it might be productive to list the properties that are being dealt with in this way by owner. I'm wondering if there's a competitive advantage going to certain owners by the order of the process that you're following. And my last point is, how much longer is this going to take? Because you hinted at 1,000 or more properties being dealt with, and you're doing 25 right now. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Just give it one moment. And I'm not seeing any movement, Mr. Chair.
Okay, anybody online?
I'm not seeing any movement, Mr. Chair.
Great, wonderful. Somebody from staff would like to answer Mr. Dixon's questions, please. Ms. Birdie, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I would be happy to address those questions. Thank you, Frank, for those questions. Very well thought out. So in terms of the process, I guess I'll start with how we're choosing these properties. So at this point, what we have been doing is just based off of geographic area. We did look for some of the more straightforward ones because this is a newer process. This process, the delegated authority process, was approved by council and was an amendment to the delegated authority bylaw. So it is supported by council. At this time, we are going by geographic area for a couple of reasons. One that you mentioned was that competitive advantage. So we are not looking at the owners of the property because we don't want to give unfair advantage to certain property owners other than others. That's definitely something that we're trying to avoid. So at the time, we're going by geographic area. In terms of timelines, we did choose a smaller amendment. So the 25 properties is probably a smaller amendment than you might see moving forward. We don't have a set timeline at the moment. We are processing them as staff time allows and with the capacity that we have. But we do intend this to take several months at least. As you see, there's a lot of work that goes into each of these. They each have to be looked at individually, compared with the policy of today. So unfortunately, we don't have an exact timeline for you, but we are working diligently to process these as best we can.
Thank you. Any other questions from the members of the committee? Okay, seeing none, we will close this public meeting. And we will move on to the regular agenda. So calling the meeting to order, I will ask for an approval of the agenda with the addeds. Councillor Chinani, Councillor Shaves, all in favor? That passes unanimously. Confirmation of the minutes at the minutes of Planning Committee meeting number 14-2023 held Thursday, August 17th, 2023 be approved. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Glenn, Councillor Osanek, all in favor? Passes unanimously. Disclosure of pecuniary interest. Anybody live or own property near these properties? Seeing none, we'll move on. Delegations none, briefings none. Subject number 7A. This would be 1274 Highway 15. So we will start with staff introduction of the item. Go ahead.
Good evening. Just waiting for my presentation to come up. But in the meantime, I can introduce myself. My name is Mike Salagi, planner with the city's planning department, presenting the staff recommendation for approval of the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for the property at 1274 Highway 15. Next slide, please. So the purpose and effect of the applications is to redesignate and rezone the lands to develop a new 4-story residential apartment building containing 51 units, along with 51 residential parking spaces, including 3 accessible spaces, 8 visitor spaces, 3 car share spaces, and 48 bicycle parking spaces. Next slide, please. The subject lands are located in the east end of Kingston on the west side of Highway 15, just south of the intersection with Biscayne and Innovation Drive. The lands have approximately 61 meters of frontage along Highway 15 and measure just over half a hectare in area. The lands are occupied by a single detached dwelling with landscaping and a single lane driveway along the southern end of the lot. The lands are bordered by the Greenwood Park West, River's Edge, and Riverview subdivisions to the west, and on the east side by the St. Lawrence Business Park and Greenwood Park subdivision. Next slide, please. The property is located within the Rideau Community Secondary Plan and is designated low-density residential and zoned under the former Pittsburgh Township zoning bylaw as a special institutional zone, permitting a range of institutional uses up to 12 meters in height. The proposal seeks to redesignate the lands to high-density residential and rezone to an urban multi-residential 2 zone within a site-specific overlay to address certain site-specific provisions. Next slide, please. First, as a reminder, for you is the initial submission, which proposed a 5-story L-shaped building with 64 units, modest side yards, setbacks from the north and south lot lines, and a generous setback at the rear with a parking area accessed at the southeast corner of the property, which then gave access to a parking area located southwest of the building, which provided 64 residential parking spaces. Next slide, please. Here you have the present iteration, which is now a more rectangular 4-story building containing 51 units with increased side yard setbacks on both the north and south ends, as well as a reduced rear yard setback at the back of the building, the west side. The parking area now extends across the southern extent of the lot and contains a greater distribution of parking for the development. I will be going into more detail about these aspects through this presentation. Next slide, please. Here is quickly just a render based on the modified design to show the development in a bit more context. Next slide, please. So throughout the review process and at the initial public meeting, a number of concerns were raised by the community and committee members. So I'll take the next few slides to go over those items and how the project addresses or has evolved to address those concerns. Next slide, please. With respect to height and density, based on community feedback and the character of the area, the development was reduced in height from 5 stories to 4 stories, which also meant a reduction of 13 units in the development and ultimately leading to a reduction in the proposed density from 111 dwelling units per net hectare to 93 dwelling units per net hectare. As detailed in our report, we believe that this property meets the locational considerations for intensification based on the official plan policies. And it is our view that given that the predominant heights in the area west of Highway 15 are generally between 2 and 2.5 stories, an increase of 2 stories to 4 is an appropriate increase, and that the site can accommodate the proposed number of units, and ultimately that the proposed density of 93 dwelling units per net hectare is appropriate. Next slide, please. Turning to overlook and shadowing. First, overlook. You could see hopefully you could see the red dashed lines, which show the extents of the initial submission. So along the northern side yard, the setback was increased from 6.9 meters to 14.6 meters, more than doubling the setback. While along the southern side yard, the setback was increased from 11.4 meters to 23.9 meters, again, more than doubling the setback. At the rear, the setback was decreased from 13.7 meters to 10.5. However, if you go to the next slide, please. Looking here at the elevations, first looking at the previous iteration on the right and the new iteration on the left, you'll note that the rear facing facade has had almost all windows and balconies removed to address those overlook concerns. The only column remaining is the furthest north, which is the one furthest away from adjacent homes. Next slide, please. In terms of shadowing, a shadow study was provided as part of an urban design study based on the revised form of the proposal. As you can see in the study, the shadow impacts are minimal. There is practically no shadow impacts throughout the summer. There is some minimal shadowing at the end of the day during the spring and fall equinox, and about 2 to 3 hours of shadowing on properties during the winter solstice. It's helpful to note that in the city of Kingston, through its terms of reference for shadow studies, we establish that shadowing is considered to be an undue adverse impact if during the summer and spring, adjacent properties are in shadow for more than 2 consecutive hours, and in the fall and winter, if the properties are in shadow for more than half the day. And in this case, the revised design allows us to meet that definition and conclude that the property does not lead to an undue adverse impact in terms of shadowing. Next slide, please. With respect to compatibility, in addition to previous comments on the changes made to reduce the potential negative impacts, including reduced height of 4 stories, which, as I noted earlier, in our view, is not incompatible with the prevalent 2 to 2.5 story heights present in the adjacent neighborhoods. The proposed color palette, as you can see in the elevations, is in keeping with the character of the existing neighborhood. Also looking to the overhead map, you'll note that the aerial demonstrates that the property is located on the periphery of the community, and due to the site conditions, is oriented toward Highway 15. This is in line with official plan policies, where this type of intensification is generally to be located to reduce any issues of impact and compatibility. On top of that, it's our opinion that the presence of this 4-story building, though different from the existing topology found within the existing neighborhood, will not be incompatible. And taking into account the tests of the official plan of being located in close proximity to transit, increasing diversity of housing options in the area, and as I've discussed, addressing concerns of undue impact, this represents a compatible form of development. Next slide, please. In terms of parking and traffic, the initial submission provided for 64 residential spaces, or a 1-to-1 ratio, and only 24 bike spaces for residents. This revised design now continues to provide that 1-to-1 residential ratio with 51 parking spaces, but also with 8 visitor spaces and 3 car share spaces. The number of bike spaces has been doubled to 48, with 20 being located external to the building and 28 in an internal bike storage room. The floor plan showing the bike storage room is available on page 225 of your report. Traffic study was also submitted in support of this application and has been reviewed and accepted by our engineering staff. The reduction of the 13 units results in a 20% reduction of potential vehicle trips for the development. And the study confirmed that during peak hours, the development will have 5 to 14 vehicles entering in the morning and in the afternoon, which is about 1 vehicle every 4 to 12 minutes. And in the morning and afternoon, 9 to 13 vehicles exiting the development, which is 1 vehicle for every 5 to 7 minutes. The report also concluded that dwell times for vehicles exiting the property is 30 seconds, and ultimately concludes that the development will not contribute significantly to the traffic along Highway 15, and that no changes to the road geometry are required, and that the present design of the site will function well. Next slide, please. Moving to stormwater management and snow, a stormwater management report was also submitted, which confirmed that post-development, the site will maintain current stormwater management conditions, which are in line with the approved stormwater plans for the River's Edge and Riverview subdivisions. Stormwater from the roof and northern portions of the site will continue to be directed overland as it is today to the north, where it'll enter the River's Edge stormwater system, while the southern half will be directed to the southwest corner. Stormwater in the parking area will be directed first to an underground cistern system where filtering and controlled release will occur to meet the present conditions. The water will then be directed overland to the Riverview stormwater system. With regards to snow, the applicant has confirmed that snow will be removed off-site. Next slide, please. Speaking now finally to tree retention and interface with adjacent properties. The applicant has identified 6 mature trees that will be retained along the rear and northern property lines, with 4 new trees to be planted along Highway 15, in addition to other landscape features such as a variety of evergreens, shrubs, perennials, and ornamental grasses. With respect to the interface with adjacent properties, a continuous 1.8 meter wood fence will be provided just around the entire perimeter of the property to address potential light spillover and noise attenuation from vehicles in the parking area and to provide additional privacy at grade. In addition, the landscape buffers have been increased around the park 0.5 meters on the side, from 5 meters and from 3 meters at here to.
I believe your bandwidth is maxing out. It seems we have lost Mr. Salegi. Can we take a few minutes until he gets back? He's
I
back.
believe he's back.
Sorry,
back.
can you? I'm almost done.
Yeah, we lost you for about 30 seconds there.
Internet connection is unstable. Sorry about that. Can you move on to the next? Where did I get cut off?
You had mentioned about wood fence.
Okay, so anyway, just to say that the wood fence will be along the entire perimeter of the fence to address the issues from the parking area and for privacy. Next slide, please. So as per our report, our recommendation for approval of the application is based on an opinion that the application is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms to the official plan, and the proposed zoning and site-specific provisions are appropriate for the site. And ultimately, the development represents good land use planning. Next slide, please. In terms of next steps, the committee recommendation will move to council, and if council approves, we will work to complete the site plan control process, ultimately moving on to the building permit review before construction can begin. And final slide, please. So thank you for your time. I apologize for the choppy internet. I'm here for any questions and comments.
Okay, no worries. Thank you very much. We will now move it to questions from the committee. Does the committee have any questions? Councillor Shinani, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm seeing you're retaining like some of the trees. But if you look at like Google Maps, there's like a very heavy tree buffer area. Is a lot of that going to be retained? I'm assuming a lot of it is probably on the other side, on the other properties. So being 4 stories, how much of a visual buffer and sound buffer would that keep with the existing neighborhood?
Just unmuting. Through you, Mr. Chair. So the back end, I believe there are 4 mature trees that are located on the property here. From what I understand, those trees are not in great health, and so they will be removed, and that's why they're being replaced at the frontage. In terms of visual privacy that they offer, I'm not entirely sure. I don't remember what kind of trees they are. Obviously, it doesn't cover the entire perimeter of the site, but that is something that we'll be working through in the site plan phase as well to see if we can get more trees to help with additional privacy coverage. And in terms of noise attenuation, it's my understanding that trees don't really offer much in the way of noise attenuation at all. However, I will say that a noise study was submitted with this application and concluded that the only noise issues for the property are from the existing traffic along Highway 15 onto the new properties, onto the new units. So nothing exceeding Ministry of Environment regulations going out onto other properties.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair. What about the existing properties? Because it looks like there are a lot of trees there now. So are a lot of them on the existing like neighboring properties that would offer a visual buffer?
I can only speak to, I've seen some photos from residents who have shown me some pictures. I believe there is some visual buffering, but those trees will remain in place. And just 1 second, sorry. Just wanted to review the report to see if there was anything else to that. So I believe Exhibit G did.
If I can help you out here.
Go ahead, Mr. Park.
Swaggy, thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Just because I am somewhat familiar with the areas, I live over on the east side of Kingston. The properties abutting the subject site do have a fair bit of mature vegetation contained within them along the property lines, just from my general observation of passing the site.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chinani. Councillor Osanek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Yeah, my questions were going to be about the trees because I remember the public meeting for this, and that was a huge concern, especially since I see the new design, the original design, like, okay, all the trees are kind of in that back corner that's like a triangle, and in the original design, it kind of went like this. So some of those trees could be retained. Now in this new design, like the parking lot goes like in a triangle right into the new corner, or right into the corner that had the vegetation. But I just thought that would be more explained because it was such a big prominent concern in the public meeting. I was just hoping that we would see that back area, with the trees retained. But anyway, 6 trees are retained. So for the ones that are going to be removed, and then new ones are planted, do we know how many new trees are being planted?
So through you, Mr. Chair, it's 4 trees to replace the 4 that will be removed.
Oh, okay, thank you. And then through you, Mr. Chair, for the 4 trees that are then going to be replanted, are you saying that's going to go along Highway 15, or can they go into that back corner to kind of make up for the trees that are going to be lost?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I don't necessarily want to move them, or I wouldn't want them moved from Highway 15 frontage, but one of the things I think we will be looking for through the site plan process is if there are ways to increase the number of trees on the lands. As you noted, the parking area does extend a little bit further into that corner, where previously there was a little bit more room. I don't think it's a massive difference, but I will want to speak to them and their engineers to see if there's any reason why another tree or more can't be planted in that area, or in addition along the northern property line as well. So yeah, that's something we can continue to explore.
All right. And then I'll just also say, like I always say, is that I know that with Bill 23, right, landscaping plan is no longer part of the city's purview, but for those trees that are going to be planted, because they're going to be much smaller than the ones being removed, we have to make sure, especially if they're going to go along Highway 15, where you have the snow and all the gucky stuff in the winter time that will then go up against those trees. We have to ensure their survival. So if there could be, like watering, being used for those trees, underground water sprinkler system, something to ensure their survival, that would be terrific. And thanks too for specifying in the report that snow will be taken off-site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shaves. Go ahead.
Thank you. Notice in the report there was no mention of EV parking. Would you be able to confirm that?
That's correct. At this point in time, I understand there's no plans for EV parking. Again, the representative of the owner and developer is here tonight. They'll be listening to this, so they'll be aware of the concern or desire for EV parking, and something again that we can keep discussing.
Okay, thank you. I noticed in one of the concerns from their neighboring residents, especially I think in the backside, the question about sloping. So how will the new development affect drainage, others to storm or water through rain onto adjoining properties? Can you just mention how that's going to be addressed, please?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Again, the way the property runs currently, a majority of the site is directed towards the southwest corner, where the pointy end, and then flows over land along the property lines toward the Riverview stormwater system. So, as I was mentioning before, that's going to continue. The only difference being that because you have a lot more permeable surface with the parking area, that water will first be retained in underground cisterns and then released at a controlled rate to match the current conditions. So basically the way that it works today will continue, and it'll be directed away from the properties to the west and basically along the approved stormwater plan.
So this project should have any negative effect on any properties in regards to flooding or anything?
No, sir. No.
Okay. In keeping with some of my previous questions from the other project, would there be a possibility of maybe having a community garden for the residents of the apartment building, especially considering food insecurity?
So through you, Mr. Chair, again, that's one of the questions that we have with the site plan is there's a certain amount of area earmarked for amenity space. Right now, they have not programmed that space. So that is an area where we can look to for that at least communal garden for residents.
Okay, thank you. Final question, especially considering the climate crisis that the city has declared. Could you confirm maybe some of the aspects that the developer may be doing to get as close to net zero as possible, not including the combined parking and reduced transportation?
Yeah, excuse me. Go through you, Mr. Chair. Like I mentioned, the representative of the owner is here. I may ask him to speak to any more details that he may have, but and speaking with him previously, he ensures that and they have a record of doing this. They have worked in the city before, but trying to use as many local materials and services as available to them. It's a little early. I don't know if they have all the specifics in terms of what systems they'll be employing. But on top of that, this is a rental building, so they will be maintaining ownership of it, and obviously will want to ensure that it's built well and that it functions as efficiently as possible. So they'll be looking to put in some I would assume pretty decent systems to speak to that. But again, if the representative has anything else to add, I invite them to speak now.
Anybody? Yes, go ahead then, sir.
Hello, everyone. Dominic here from New Empire, representative of this development. It's very simple and straightforward. The more efficient we make the building, the better it is for us to maintain it as a rental building. So while it is a little bit early to speak to the specifics of what we'll be doing in the building, we are going to be looking at the most efficient HVAC units for each unit. They will be individually air conditioned, and using the most efficient systems for the building as a whole. We don't traditionally look at additional sources of offsetting energy, solar systems or anything like that. We haven't done that, but we plan to use the most efficient building materials. And that should get us to the point where it makes it affordable for us to maintain the building and effective for the eventual residents to live there comfortably. That's our current plan going forward. As we get into more specific designs, our consultants will be able to guide us along as to what everything's changing so quickly these days too. So they'll be able to advise us on what the best practices are.
Okay, thank you for appreciating it in order to reduce the amount of emissions coming from that building and surrounding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Glenn.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So just a couple of quick questions to follow up on my colleagues' inquiries. So with regards to the trees that are going to be planted, I'm just confirming you're looking at planting native species?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, it's correct.
Okay, and do we know which ones yet?
just trying to pull up the landscape plan to confirm for you. Just a moment. The species is, sorry, a autumn gold, a ginkgo biloba. Sorry if I don't.
Thank you. Well done. Thank you for confirming that this is going to be rental units. Are there going to be any of these units that will be affordable rental units? Or is it all market value?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe this will all be market value.
Okay. Was any consideration given to having any 3-bedroom units? I note that there's only 1 and 2-bedroom units, specifically because, you know, we're seeing more and more people still working remotely, and you know, this is a family area, and I'm, you know, concerned if people have more than 1 child that they might not have enough space. Was any thought given to that?
In terms of the developer's thought process, I don't know. I have to assume that they're looking at marketability of the building, perhaps understanding this is obviously a more suburban location, and thinking of this as being perhaps a step into the neighborhood. Either, well, step in, step out. If you're maybe growing up, leaving your parents' home, want something nearby, or you like the area, you can continue to rent in the area. Or moving in at a small family and moving in and then looking for options as they arise. Beyond that, I don't think I can speak to their thought process. In my understanding of the file, there hasn't been any consideration for 3-bedroom units. But again, if Dominic has anything to add to that, welcome his input. But those are my views on it.
Yep. We're just recently occupying a rental building at Cataraqui Woods and Terra Verde. That one's, and like I said, in the midst of being occupied right now. We do have a few 2+ den units there, effectively 3-bedroom units, and they seem to be doing well. If we see that the demand is there for those type of units, we are still at a stage where we have the opportunity to redesign some of the interior of these units. We'll basically be doing that based on market demand. So if there's definitely a need for it, we can entertain some of that, but it'll obviously change the unit mix that we've presented here, the unit count. We'd probably have to, yeah, it would likely result in the loss of a couple units to increase other sizes. So we're at this time, we're proceeding with the designs that we have. There could potentially be some opportunity to increase the bedroom sizes.
Okay, thank you for considering it. Having lived in a multi-bedroom unit in the GTHA with family, I can say that you probably will see some need in the future. So thank you for considering it. So my last question is with regards to accessibility. I note that you've met that it's met AOD requirements. Are any of the actual units themselves accessible?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe blanking on the exact percentage, but I believe through the building code, I believe it's 10%. And Mr. Barr will probably speak into this, but there's a certain requirement for accessible units. I'll hand it over to
Mr. Barr.
Thanks, and through you, Chair. Mike's almost there. It's about 15% in multi-residential unit buildings that have to be designed to be accessible. In addition to the units being accessible, the building also has to be accessible. So that generally means level entry into the front doors and foyers, or at least ramp features. So we will be looking for those external features in the building through site plan control, and the building officials will be looking for those minimum requirements under the building code.
So just to sort of follow up a little bit more on that, I understand with the accessibility to the building itself, it's with the units that I'm curious, what are the accessibility requirements for units? Like, what does that look like?
Thanks, and through you, Chair, what those typically look like is wider doorways, more maneuverable spaces inside the units, including the washrooms themselves. So they have to demonstrate on the floor plans at the time of building permit that those maneuverability aspects for accessibility are present.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the committee? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the public. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak or ask questions on this?
So as we've done with the last two, Blair, there are how many in Memorial Hall?
Two speakers.
Okay, so we will do the first two public members in the speaker, and I can note currently we have 5 on the public viewing gallery. Just as a reminder to everybody, there will be 5 minutes to speak each, and we will collect all the comments at once, and then staff and or the applicant will have a chance to respond at the very end. So with that, we'll wait and see our first person from Memorial Hall. Give us one moment, please. Through you, Mr. Chair, it actually appears that the computer that was in the memorial area seems to have gone to sleep for a little bit, so it's just rebooting. We're going to actually start with the online one so we can get started with the public comments. I will first recognize Annalie Bounds. So also a reminder to all members of the public, you will need to state your address for the minutes, please, and thank you. All right, there you go.
Hello there, my name is Annalie Bounds and I'm at 71 Schooner Drive. So my house is located right at that back point. Essentially, a couple of things to know. I was happy to hear that snow would be removed because the city would have been hearing from me 12 times a day if it wasn't. Just as a note, the trees, a lot of them are on 1274. A lot. There are some houses on Biscayne and Schooner that do have some in their backyard. A lot of them are legally on the property. They're on the other side of those metal poles. Some of them are in horrible shape. Some of them aren't. So I'm not sure when they're saying that they're going to remove 4 and replace. I'm wondering what's happening with the rest of them. If they're completely dead, as some are, it'd be good to have them removed, but there are some other live ones as well. 2 questions I have. One, kind of coinciding with the removal of the snow, which again is fantastic. The holding tanks or cisterns, whatever phrase was used, there's going to be openings, much like the storm drains on our streets. In the winter, they get completely plugged with ice and snow unless residents take it upon themselves to clear the ice. Will that be done? Otherwise, those holding tanks in the winter are useless unless there's an opening for the ice melt to go down. So I'm just wondering that the property manager or what have you, whoever's removing the snow, would be also making sure that the ice is cleared. Also, garbage, maybe I missed this, but is it going to be like an outdoor garbage dumpster setting? If so, where on the parking lot, or would everything be held indoors until garbage day? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I'm going to recognize Tracy Ware.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm at 27 Biscayne, and the main problem we have is the traffic on the highway. The highway and the intersection is already pretty busy with the highway and Biscayne. So if you would do that, if you actually drive it, you'd find it surprising that the idea is that the apartment can turn left onto the highway. That seems a little bit hard to imagine. So that was a concern last time. I don't see any attention to it in the new document, but it's still a concern for us. It's like what it is right now is you can turn left coming out of the shopping center down the street. There's a Food Basics, but it's very hard to do. And it would be equally hard to turn out of the apartment onto Highway 15. That's the main concern. It's a general one. The other one, I'll just say that there was a neighbor of mine who was away for the summer, would appreciate more time. So I will just bring that forward if you want to consider it.
Thank you very much. I will now recognize Susanna Bretman-Breener.
Hi, yes, my name is Susanna Bateman-Brenner and I live on 700 Holloway Drive. My house, the backyard backs to the two properties that are being in question, especially the one on 1274. I have a few comments here that I wrote some notes, and it seems to me that all this, I just came in the area 2 months ago. And so I bought this house thinking that, my God, it's just a beautiful residential, low density area. And so my first question is this situation has been approved? Because it seems to me that either the councilors or even the public take it that this building is going to be built. And I have a few things to say about it. First of all, I bought the house thinking it's low density. Second, I think the crime has increased. I know this because my daughter lives in the area now 4 years. And I'm afraid that a building of such a type will increase the crime in the area. Also, the noise is another concern. 51 cars in my backyard is not something to take light. And I'm pretty sure that the noise will increase. And so the value of my house will decrease, in fact, because of all this situation. The trees are a big concern, and I don't see, if you guys saw the map that Mike presented, you can see that there will be a very few trees in the building because obviously the whole building occupies the whole area and the trees are just left on the sides of the area. So it will be very less trees. It won't be nothing like we have today. It's almost a forest here in the back. And also I want to say that 51 cars, it will make lots of noise. I am sure of that. And also the traffic in Highway 15, the whole thing, I'm not agree with the whole thing. I don't know if this is a go, and already I should be quiet, because if it's a go, where is there to complain? But I'm definitely against such a building in a low density area. Why don't they build in the other side? The other side is Innovation Drive. Is my understanding a hotel was built in there. So buildings should go in that side and not in the side where townhouses and small single homes and big single homes and semi-detaches, and the whole thing is a low density. So why are they building a building in here? And I'm completely against it. So in the value of my house, I wish somebody will tell me if the value is going to decrease, I better start selling today and get out of here. So it's very sad because I just came into the most beautiful house I have ever owned. And all this situation is coming to my attention. Is very sad, very sad. And accordingly, either the councilors are agree with this or the city already passed the approval or something, because it's like if everybody's concerned about a few trees, the forest here will disappear. Schooner will be the Schooner where the street is called Schooner, they will have these garbage dumpsters. And if the people are going to stay with the garbage, no. In a building like that, there will be big dumpsters. So get ready for the smell and the mice, the rats, and the whole thing. So I'm not agree with a building like this at all. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I will recognize Guy Phillips.
Thank you very much. My name is Guy Phillips, and my wife and I live at 75 Schooner Drive. So we abut very significantly on the back of this proposed development. I would support many of the comments made about the likely loss of the woodlot that essentially makes the buffer between us on Schooner Drive and this property. And Highway 15, yes, there is the noise of the sirens going by, but otherwise that woodlot is a very nice little nature reserve that in previous years we've had deer and coyotes in our backyard. The loss of those trees is likely to diminish, as the last speaker said, and the various rabbits and particularly bird life that habits that woods there is going to be adversely affected. Having seen the loss of habitat around us since we first moved into Schooner Drive in 2009, the new Schooner Drive, as we call it, which is the north part of it above Biscayne, used to have bobolinks in the back. Now it's all homes and pavement. So the loss of woods, I would acknowledge, however, that indeed there are some dead trees that we worry may someday topple over into our yards or potentially hit our structures. But most of the woods is on the 1274 development. We have maybe 2 or 3 mature trees in our space, but it's also the shrubbery that provides that sort of natural wood buffer between us and the existing house, which is not noisy except for the occasional pool party in the summertime. So I agree that there is going to be considerably more noise. I have 2 major concerns. One is this new development, albeit lower, is now much closer to the Schooner properties abutting that that section of the property. The building is going to be that much closer to our properties, and the parking lot is going to be literally in our backyard. My final concern is, how long would this development or this build take? Because with the construction that went on in the Holloway Drive area, we suffered a couple of summers of blasting as they were building those properties. And I'm just wondering about our loss of quiet enjoyment of our property when this build is going to go on with trucks backing up and beeping, and the dust is going to be absolutely horrendous and will not do our backyard plants and flowers any good at all. So I'd like to know how long we're going to have to suffer this noise and other intrusions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. So I will now recognize Del Stowe, who wishes to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. How are you guys? I'm Del Stowe, and I live at 85 Biscayne. So we're affected pretty heavily by this, mainly because we have a lot of trees on our property, which we love our trees. And what we're concerned with really is we had heard that maybe it was going to go from a 5 to a 3-story, which would have been a lot better. In the sense that the balconies are what we're kind of concerned with. The balconies are going to face towards our 85 Biscayne. If I want to go running around outside, I don't want people to be able to, peer over or look. So it was kind of important that we thought maybe the balconies were going to be maybe eliminated and put into those bars where you can open your patio door but can't walk out and look. So that's one of our concerns. We also wonder about parking. I know they have 51 units and 51 spaces, but if somebody has more than one vehicle, or I know your 1-to-1 is better than the 0.8 I heard earlier, but our concern still lays with some people have 2 vehicles, and being here in this location, you're not right downtown, or you're not close to, you can catch a bus and so on, but a lot of people still like using their vehicles. So my concern lies with, are they going to use Biscayne as off-street parking if they don't have parking on their own property, which then affects snow removal, so on and so forth, garbage pickup. Just something that we were thinking about as well. I'm wondering why if they can, why they can't put more trees up along the 85, 83, maybe even 73, 75, all those areas. They're only putting up 4 trees. I mean, I don't think it's a financial issue, because I would gladly put up a few trees of my own there. You know, I mean, if they want, because what I really need is a space between us and them, that we don't have to look at the building and they don't look at us, basically. The other thing that we worry about is I wasn't really thinking about the garbage and so on, because what they've decided, I think, on this is that there's a loading zone and they've waived the requirement to close in that loading zone. And I'm wondering what the reasoning behind that was. If I can get an answer back, not right now, whenever you guys can get back to me on that. What else was there, Deb? I think that's about it. So basically, if we could get, you know, I wish it was 3 stories. It's not going to be. Obviously, financially, that wouldn't have been feasible, because it was originally 5. And Mike, that's correct. We moved here about 1.5 years ago. We were told it was going to be 3, so it's 4 now. We were told they weren't going to be putting balconies on that side. Obviously, they are. So those are the things we're concerned with. We would just like to see our 85 remain. It's like an oasis, really, our home. We have a pond, we have all kinds of trees, beautiful trees. It's manicured well. And I just want it to stay that way. That's my comfort. That's when I get home from my busy day at work. And I like to relax and not be bothered. So that's basically where we're at. So it's not we're against the development in any way. We just would like to either see it reduced or at least some compensation made or for putting in some more trees to buffer the 85, at least from the 1274. I don't think that's asking for much. Thank you, guys. And Mike, you've been really good wherever you are. Mike, I appreciate you. You've been very good with me in our discussions we've had. So thank you. And thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Okay, and I can confirm we now have the public computer back online. So I will have my colleague bring over the 2 members of the public that wish to speak in Memorial Hall. So just give us 1 moment while he brings them over. Thank you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Terry Swain, I live at 83 Biscayne. And I would, a lot of my concerns have been addressed, but as far as the fence that goes from 83 Biscayne to 85 Biscayne, presently, I would like to see that fence taken down and a higher fence put up. They have a little small privacy fence, which looks like it's latticed, which really isn't going to do much for privacy. Right now, there are, at the back of my yard, there are 2 dead ash trees. And those ash trees have roots that go under the fence and into my yard. So I think one of the councillors addressed before what kind of trees are going to go in there. Don't want to see ash trees or elm trees that are subject to disease. But I would like to see mature trees, well, bigger trees put in at the beginning, so we don't have to wait 20 years for the trees to finally give us some privacy. The other thing is the privacy screen. I don't understand what that's for. That's why I think a fence would be much better. And that's basically my concerns. Other concerns have been elicited, and I do agree with the lady from Holloway Drive who spoke about, you know, it being too high density. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I believe through you, Mr. Chair, there is one more member that wishes to speak in the, there she is. Perfect.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great, thank you. My name is Kathleen McBrien. I'm a, sorry, I was gonna tell you where I work, and that's not appropriate here. I'm usually doing these things at work. I'm at, where am I at? 49 Schooner Drive, okay? I'm a little farther down the Schooner Way, and I was one of those people that had the privilege of having the construction on Holloway and the development that was behind me. We were advised at that time, because there was sort of a drainage that went past the back of our property, that there would be the anticipation of having some trees as a buffer. I just want to give you, because I had some pictures, I'm hoping you can see these. This was my property before the construction. You can see some of the trees behind there. Again, my property before the construction. Oh, no, that's after the construction. Sorry, that's before the construction. So this is what we're talking about in terms of the level of trees that are there. It's not 4 or 5 trees. It's an actual wooded area where we get bunnies and we get you know, cardinals. I've seen blue jays and finches. It's quite an area for wildlife. And so this is the back of my property as we see it today. The cedars that are there, we planted on our side of the property after we recognized that all the trees were removed. And that's about, I want to say about 5 years of growth. So we still have people who, even just in houses, are looking down in our backyards. So I just wanted to point that out, because I'm absolutely in favor of what people are saying in regards to the trees and the natural environment. One of the other things that I have concerns about, well, I have several concerns. I apologize. I'll keep you here for a few minutes. One of my major concerns is the decisions that we make today. I understand that the person who's doing the development and scheduling to do this work also owns 1262. And I know we're not considering 1262 right now, but as a person who lives on Schooner a little farther down, there's more treed areas there into that sort of more deep peak in that property. I'm not exactly sure what the number of hectares are, but if we calculate at 93 units per hectare for a larger piece of property, the size of the development on the piece of property next to the one we're talking about is going to be even significantly larger than the one that we have now. So I'm just sort of projecting that. In terms of the concerns, traffic concerns. So, you know, if any of you have tried to drive up 15 as the base lets out, it can actually back up from the 401 to what is it? It's John Marks, I think, where the dental office and everything is. So it's significant in terms of the traffic flow. And I think that we're looking at putting in a lot more people and a lot more housing and a lot more traffic before we have the appropriate infrastructure to be able to actually accommodate these people. You know, things like sewage, water, you know, has that been done? I know they've been ripping up 15 lower down towards Highway 2. Is this going to be something that we're going to have in terms of construction to be able to accommodate not just the building that they're talking about at 1274, but whatever they're going to be thinking about at 1262? One of my really big pet peeves, and trust me, I've talked to Bell and I've talked to Rogers and I've talked to all those wonderful people, is the fact that I cannot get cell service in my home. I actually have a landline because people can't, I drop calls in my house.
30 seconds.
And I'm sorry?
You have 30 seconds on your time.
Oh, sorry. So, we need the infrastructure for people to be able to have the internet and things that are available. You're talking about putting a lot more people in there. Parking has already been addressed. My main issue is, why wasn't this considered for medium density residential when it's already backing on to low density as opposed to a high density? If you're talking high density, the east side of 15 would have been a lot better for this location than to back it onto homes and into people's backyards. Okay.
Thank you.
you.
Anyone else on the list?
I believe that was the only two in the Memorial Hall. So I believe we are good to have answers to the questions brought by the members of the public.
Great. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I will try to go through all my notes here. If they're a little scattered, I apologize. And if anyone on my team wants to help answer anything I may have missed, then please do. But with respect to trees, one thing first to recognize is that through the city's tree bylaw, trees, I know there are a high number of trees on the property, but trees that are located within the development envelope, so the parking area and the tree, and the building itself, are not required to be replaced. It's trees that are, and neither are ash trees or trees in ill health. So when I say that there are 4 trees that are being removed and replaced, those are 4 healthy trees that are being removed and replaced. Other trees that aren't in great condition don't need to be replaced. So I recognize that there are a much higher density of trees, and we're talking only about 10 at the end. But that's why I speak to those numbers specifically, because of the requirements of the bylaw. As I mentioned earlier, we will continue to work with the applicant to see if there are ways to add more landscaping, more trees throughout the property and along the perimeter for the various reasons stated. But in terms of their requirements and the moves they've made to maintain the mature trees that are in healthy condition, that's where those 6 and 4 come from. In terms of the cisterns, the stormwater management report has a clause in it which requires that owners or the applicant maintain the stormwater management system, including the cisterns, in good working order. So they will be required to maintain those throughout the year and the lifetime of their ownership of the building, or if they sell the building to whoever the future owner would be. In terms of garbage, if you have it in front of you on page 225 of the report, shows you a floor plan of the first, the at-grade floor, and there is a specific garbage room internal to the building that will have that will retain all of the garbage and recycling dumpsters. Those will be rolled out on collection days and then rolled back in. So you won't have exterior garbage enclosures stinking up the neighborhood. Speaking to approval, no, the application has not, has not been approved. That's part of this process here tonight. The committee will take a vote and make a recommendation to council to approve or deny or approve with conditions, and that will come. A final approval of the plan will come later at a council decision. So we're still discussing the merits of the application tonight. We have a colleague here in traffic, so I'll defer to him later when I'm done speaking to the other items. In terms of density, why this location? It's listed in our report, but basically looking at the official plan policies for finding locations that are well suited to intensification. This property meets all of those criteria, being next to express transit service, being within walking distance to a district commercial use. A number of open space and park amenities are also within walking distance. It's along an arterial roadway. So that's why this property was selected for, or why the justification for the increase in intensity, why high density and not medium density. That's really just because we are tasked with assessing the questions before us. So if they had come forward with a medium density application, we would have assessed it on those merits, but they came forward with a high density request. And based on the changes to the design, we feel that, as I said before, this is a good location for intensification and that the potential undue adverse impacts have been addressed. There was a comment about the closer setback of the building to the rear. And as I mentioned, recognizing that there was a reduction of, I think, 3.2 meters in the setback. However, remembering the elevations, that setback elevation no longer has nearly the same amount of windows or balconies as it did prior. So one of the concerns being overlook has been effectively eliminated at that side. And from the shadow study, as you saw, there was very limited shadowing from the building, particularly at the west end. In terms of the balconies facing out to the north, again, one of the major changes that have occurred throughout this design process was to increase significantly the setback at the northern lot line. Again, I believe it was 6.9 to 14 meters, I think it was, or 14.3 meters. So more than doubling that distance. Something that we'll discuss through the site plan process is the material of the balcony, the glazing, if there could be some ways of having some more opaque material used to, again, further increase and improve the privacy concerns. In terms of parking, the proposed parking as it is now meets the requirements of the zoning bylaw. And they have been informed that there is no overnight parking permitted on the streets, particularly during the winter days. So that if that's something that's, I mean, I expect that the market will kind of decide that for them, in the sense that if they have too many vehicles, it just might not be the appropriate location for them. But otherwise, we are really trying to future-proof the building by providing one unit or one space per unit, having car share spaces there for the future use of tenants and members of the public, as well as the close proximity of the express transit service and other multi-use trails in the neighborhood. With respect to the loading space and the removal of the privacy fence there, someone else mentioned privacy fence. I assumed it was for the loading space, but basically that provision is deemed to be acceptable because if, well, we don't have it right up, but the loading space is located just to the rear of the building. So where that privacy enclosure would be there to shield the public from view or noise of that loading space, there are no windows at the property. So residents wouldn't be impacted by that loading space being there. And then again, also speaking to someone else's question, the perimeter fence would be a solid wood fence, not a lattice. So both visually and from a sound perspective, there is buffering there. So the provision for a direct enclosure around the loading space was deemed to be unnecessary because the intent is still being met. I think that was everything that I had. I'll turn it over to my colleague in engineering to speak to the traffic questions. And if I remember anything I missed, I will pipe back up. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm Mark Dixon, the Acting Manager of Transportation Infrastructure. In regards to the concerns related to site access and access out onto Highway 15, this was addressed in the traffic impact study that was identified or developed by the applicant. There are heavy volumes along Highway 15, but the access out onto Highway 15, as we're seeing in the traffic impact study, meets the City of Kingston service levels, which is a service level E and a volume to capacity of 1. So they've satisfied that requirement for a city, and based on Mike's presentation earlier, it's sufficient for what we would deem acceptable onto for a new site access.
Thank you. Mr. Barr, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Sorry, I'm just trying to balance my face on the screen. I think it keeps cutting my head partially off as I'm talking. But I just wanted to follow up on two other points. So there was a question that was posed: is there enough water and wastewater capacity to service this development? A servicing study was submitted with the application, and it has been determined that there is sufficient water and wastewater capacity to service this development in the area. And then the stormwater management report also illustrated that the site can meet and satisfy the stormwater requirements for this site as well. Another thing I heard come up was density a few times, and density adjacent to low density residential, and why here. And we do have the tests in the official plan that speak to compatibility and the location of it and the appropriateness of it. And I think it's important to note that this site wholly gains access, fronts onto, and relies on the frontage along Highway 15 in order to function. So this site does not connect directly into the neighborhood and behind. It doesn't have a pedestrian connection. It doesn't have a vehicular connection. So items and externalities like vehicular traffic and parking and initial walking trips do take place and start and end on Highway 15 rather than making their way into the neighborhood. And part of our consideration with compatibility, the question comes up, how do these uses live next to each other? And our compatibility criteria speaks to various land uses living next to each other without adverse impact on each other. So when we're looking at it, this question comes up, especially when we're considering higher densities next to lower densities. And what we then look to implement is appropriate built form considerations. So how tall are these buildings next to each other? What is the level of parking? How is the buffering and screening being dealt with? And unpackaged tonight, explained by Mike through both the presentation and the questions, city staff are satisfied with the level of compatibility that this building exemplifies adjacent to the low density residential, and the moves that have been made since the initial submission by reducing the height, increasing setbacks, limiting windows and visibility onto adjacent properties. And then the next step that we'll take through site plan control is to look at additional mitigation measures for things like fencing. Councilor Osanek, I know I've heard a couple times additional trees from both yourself and members of the public. So looking at those opportunities for additional greening to also increase that kind of soft landscaping at the time of site plan control.
Thank you. And there's one other question. Does anybody know how long it will take for this to be built? Mr. Barr?
Thanks, and through you, Chair. This building doesn't have a level of underground parking with it, so these types of buildings tend to go up a bit quicker. I would say, in my experience and just understanding how these buildings built out, we're probably looking at a year or under a year to construct this building once it gets going.
Great, thank you. I believe that has answered all the questions. So there is a recommendation before us. I guess I should ask for a mover and a seconder before I ask for any last comments. Councillor Chinani, Councillor Shaves, and now it's on the floor. Now you can try and convince your fellow councillors one way or the other. Anybody wish to make any comments? Councillor Osanek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. So I'm just like hearing about which trees were going to be planted along Highway 15, even though it was only 4 of them, and that they were ginkgos. And the comment was that ginkgos are native to Ontario. Some people on the line have been going back and forth that ginkgos might not be so native to Ontario after all, and especially their fruit, once it starts dropping, can be really slippery, and like obviously there's going to be a sidewalk along Highway 15 for this apartment, and so I don't know, it just might be messy, slippery, and the fruit doesn't come out for 10 years. I'm just wondering, like, when we get to that stage at site plan, can we look at like true native species, maybe like just to keep in mind, like linden or hickory, but like bitternut hickory or basswood or hackberry. Not maple really, because that bug is coming over from Asia, and I'm worried we have too many maples, but I just want to put that in the minutes. Thank you.
Mr. Park, or Director Park.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So, Councillor Rosanek, that's actually a really good point, because yeah, ginkgos do tend to, I think it's, don't want to be gender specific here, but the tree that makes the fruit, actually, when it does drop, it actually gets quite smelly, and it is a bit of a mess. What I can say with this developer in particular, having worked with them on other developments across the city, they do take a lot of pride in their landscaping and the amount of greenery they do put around their sites. So I can almost ensure that they will work with us to come up with the best planting plan and to address the concerns that have been raised by the public, especially around native species, because they do take a tremendous amount of pride in their landscaping. They do tend to go above and beyond what generally is considered the minimum. So I can say that for certainty with this developer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Councillor Rosanek.
And through you, Mr. Chair, I also just want to say the one thing where the residents were saying about how there's like more than like a lot more trees than what are just mentioned in this report, and where staff were saying that if they're dead trees or in poor condition, the replacement of those trees don't count, like they don't have to be replaced. Just for the members of the public on here, our tree bylaw that stands right now too, it only applies to replacement trees for trees that are greater than 15 centimeters in diameter. So I haven't, like, I don't back onto this property, but there could be more trees, like there could be some trees that are not dead, but they could be smaller than 15 centimeters of diameter. And, you know, we would think that if they're cut down as well, because it sounds like there's a little forest going on in this back corner, the reason why they don't have to be replanted when they're cut down is because our tree bylaw only applies to trees that are greater than 15 centimeters in diameter. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And then since the residents have said that the owner also owns 1262 Highway 15. So just throwing it out that if that's the case, when we're going to see a future application, looking at Google Maps, there's a lot more trees on 1262 in that back corner. So if that 1262 one day comes to planning committee, definitely we're going to be requiring more of those trees in the back corner to be retained than what we're doing for 1274 tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from the committee? Councillor Shaves.
Thank you. Just to follow up on Councillor Sanek's comment about trees and the environment. A lot of the residents who spoke also talked about the nature back there, how it is, and not just in regards to trees, but also maybe the shrubbery. Maybe replaced might be friendly to pollinators, or maybe in the fall or winter have berries for the blue jays or the cardinals may come by, or even the bunnies. So maybe something that the applicant may take into consideration. And just one thing to confirm that was sort of stated in regards to the garbage being taken in, taken out, rolled in, rolled out. Just to confirm, this is being privately picked up and not by the city. That's the only question I got. Thank you.
Mr. Barr, go ahead.
Yes, through Chair, Councillor Shaves, it is private garbage collection for this site, which is being facilitated through that private garbage room. It's not something that the city would undertake in that type of function. So yes, this is private garbage collection.
Okay, thank you. Just when he said rolled in, rolled out, I thought maybe they're rolling it to the curb or something. Thank you.
No, they're not rolling it out to the curb. They're rolling it out on site.
Thank you. Anyone else from the committee? Seeing none, we call the question. All in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to the final recommended report at 5 to 7 Cataraqui Street. May we have a staff introduction, please?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. My name is Amy Didrikson. I'm a planner with the City of Kingston, presenting the recommendation for the draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment at 5 to 7 Cataraqui Street. A public meeting was held for this application in February of 2022. Next slide, please. The purpose of the application is to permit a subdivision of 76 townhouse units with potential second residential units in the basement, as well as to permit the subdivision with a new private internal street. The existing multi-residential zone of the property permits row housing and the proposed medium density. However, a zoning bylaw amendment is required to permit the site configuration of the townhouses and to provide relief from specific parking requirements. Since the public meeting, the Kingston zoning bylaws come into effect, and as a result, the recommended zoning amendment brings the property under the regulation of the Kingston zoning bylaw and applies a UR3B zone with an exception overlay. Next slide, please. The property is centrally located in the Inner Harbor neighborhood, which is north of the Central Business District to the west of the Rideau Canal. The surrounding area has a mix of land uses, including commercial, residential, institutional, industrial, and open space. Express and local transit stops are located along Montreal Street within walking distance. There are a number of active transportation connections nearby, including the K&P Trail and the Waterfront Trail that provides a connection to the downtown area. The site is considered a brownfield as it's an underutilized property with a history of industrial use. The property was the site of a former fuel storage and servicing station, as well as a fur and hide warehouse. As part of the redevelopment, the remains of the former industrial use will be cleared and the site will be cleaned up according to provincial requirements. The property is in a residential designation of the official plan, as shown on the map graphic in the yellow area. The property, it's notable, I should highlight that the property is also part of the North Kingstown secondary planning exercise, which is ongoing and has been reviewed through this application as well for consistency with the vision. Buildings surrounding the site include a variety of heights and scales. Residential dwellings range from 1 to 3 stories and include a range of types such as single detached dwellings and semi-detached as well. There's a 3-story multi-unit dwelling at the corner of Orchard and Cataraqui. Industrial and commercial buildings in the area take on a variety of heights and scales as well, ranging from 1 to 3 stories. And there's 2 notable heritage buildings that I've highlighted through photos on this slide, with being the Woolen Mill and the Bailey Broom building that are considered to be adjacent. And as a result, the applicant submitted a heritage impact study as part of this application. Next slide, please. So the proposed subdivision is shown here, which has been revised since the public meeting to reduce the lots from 77 to 76. The visitor parking area has been increased as a result of the public input with 12 spaces proposed, including 1 accessible space and visitor bike parking as well. The subdivision would be developed in 2 phases, with the first phase including 15 townhomes along River Street that would have freehold ownership, and the second phase would include 61 common element townhouses along the new private street that connects Cataraqui and Orchard. Common elements would include the private street and servicing below, as well as the sidewalks and visitor parking internal to the site. Next slide, please. So here we have the conceptual elevations that were reviewed through the applications, showing the 2.5-story townhouses with an attached garage for each unit. There's 3 different unit types put forward that would have 3 to 4 bedrooms in the primary unit, with a 1-bedroom unit and the optional second residential unit. Mix of materials are shown through the elevations, intended to reflect the character of the surrounding area, consistent with recommendations in the Heritage Impact Study. And as part of the final plan of subdivision application that would be required, staff are looking for architectural design guidelines that would be required to be submitted with any future building permit to ensure consistency with the recommendations of the Heritage Impact Study, as well as the city's urban design guidelines. Next slide, please. So areas of interest raised through the public input are outlined here and expanded upon, responded to in the staff report. I'll go into these 4 areas in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So there was concern expressed through the public input that the local traffic network would not have the capacity to accommodate the traffic generated by the units, the additional units. And the applicant has submitted a supportive traffic impact study that's been revised through the technical review in response to comments from city transportation staff that the study does recommend the opening of River Street at Rideau Street to manage the additional traffic and to mitigate any potential impacts. So as part of the technical review submissions, the applicant has provided a conceptual drawing of the intersection, which would be unsignalized, shown here with River Street open to Rideau and River Street brought up to municipal standards. And the cost of this would be covered by the applicant as laid out in the draft plan of subdivision conditions. Similar to the last application, there was interest in how snow removal would be managed. The applicant has confirmed that snow removal on the internal private roadway will be managed by the condominium corporation, which will truck the snow from the site. And on River Street, as a municipal street, snow clearing would be provided by the city. Next slide, please. So questions were raised through the public input regarding whether there's adequate parking for residents and visitors and deliveries and workmen in this context, and whether there's adequate space in driveways and garages. And as highlighted earlier, the applicant has increased the number of parking spaces in the visitor parking area from 7 originally proposed to 12. And the number of spaces do meet the new requirements of the Kingston zoning bylaw for visitor parking. And the proposal exceeds currently the short-term bike parking that would be required for the common element units. And in response to technical review and public feedback since the public meeting, the applicant has included attached garages for all the units and extended the length of the garages. Details have also been provided to demonstrate how a car can park within the garage, along with bike parking and waste storage, and the size of a standard car relative to the driveway area. Parking for the primary unit and the additional residential unit is intended to be provided in the garage and the driveway. It's notable that the property does meet criteria for reduced parking requirements under the official plan for additional residential units, being in proximity to express transit, commercial uses, and open space. However, the applicant intends to provide 2 parking spaces for each townhouse unit, 1 in the driveway and 1 in the garage. Permission for a reduced driveway length along the private street has been incorporated into the zoning bylaw amendment, and this length of 5.4 meters will be flagged for future tenants and purchasers through warning clauses in the subdivision agreement to highlight that certain vehicles may not fit in this particular length of driveway. Next slide, please. A number of public comments received inquired regarding the cleanup of this site and the requirements in place to ensure public health and safety are protected. So with any change in land use from an industrial to residential land use, Ontario regulation requires soil and groundwater cleanup to provincial standards before the province will issue a record of site condition. The municipality cannot issue building permits until the property has been properly remediated, tested, and a record of site condition has been accepted by the province. As well, the recommended draft plan of subdivision conditions include the requirement that the record of site condition is provided prior to final plan of subdivision approval. There were also several comments received regarding the piles of debris on the property and property standards. And the applicant has indicated they've made an effort to tidy the site and organize the remnants of former buildings in response to community concern. The photo on the slide was taken in August of this year. And I understand the applicant's also actively pursuing the record of site condition and environmental assessments and will pursue the removal of construction waste in accordance with provincial regulations. Next slide, please. Finally, there were some questions regarding affordability and dwelling unit types. There will continue to be 3 townhouse unit types proposed for the subdivision, similar to the what was shown at the public meeting. These range in floor sizes. They're shown in different colors on the site plan. The floor plan of the potential 1-bedroom, second residential unit in the basement is shown here. The unit 3 townhouse type shown in yellow is the most compact. It has a total floor area of approximately 1,500 square feet, I believe. While the proposal does not include affordable units as defined by the municipal housing and homelessness plan, the proposal introduces additional residential units into a low vacancy market, which is understood to improve housing affordability overall. And includes the option of the additional residential unit in the basement level, which is a form of affordable housing encouraged by the official plan. Next slide, please. So the recommended zoning amendment is outlined here. Just highlighting that the UR3B zone proposed permits townhouses at the proposed medium density consistent with the existing zone. The exception overlay does include a reduction to the minimum rear yard setback from what is required in the UR3B zone of 6 meters reduced down to 5.5 meters. And specific reductions at specific pinch points that are highlighted in an exhibit or a figure in the zoning amendment. So you can see there's certain areas where the property dips in and there are minimum rear yard setbacks at those specific pinch points, recognizing the sort of unique property boundaries in those areas, but minimum would be minimum rear yard dimensions. And there's also the specific reliefs to the driveways and flexibility for bike parking for these dwelling types. Next slide, please. Staff are recommending approval of the zoning amendment and draft plan of subdivision, which would enable the compatible residential redevelopment of a brownfield site in an existing built-up area of the urban boundary within walking distance of complementary land uses, transit stops, and is a site well connected to active transportation infrastructure, such as the K&P and Waterfront Trail. The basis for the recommendation is expanded upon in much greater detail in the staff report, including the consistency with the provincial policy statement and conformity with the official plan. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, after committee's recommendation to council, if the applications are approved, the proposal will require a final plan of subdivision application and a final plan of condominium application prior to building permit applications. Next slide, please. I'm happy to answer any questions. I understand the applicant is here tonight as well.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Councillor Janani, go ahead.
Yeah, so I had one question on behalf of Councillor Ridge. So he was wondering if the process moves forward, what assurances can the developer give about maintenance of the site and responsiveness to the concerns of the community?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, is this a question for the applicant?
I guess yeah, it would be.
Good evening, and through you, Mr. Chair. My name is Yuko Leclerc. I'm the planner from FO10, representing the applicant. The applicant is also here this evening. The applicant is committed to cleaning up the site as part of this overall development process. The reason that the materials on site have not been removed yet is really coming down to the contamination in those materials and ensuring that the removal proceeds in accordance with Ministry of the Environment requirements that will be vetted through the record of site condition process. So we just recently received the phase 2 environmental assessment from the environmental engineer just this past week, which is effectively the catalyst for moving into the next stage of getting those provincial clearances and developing a plan for mediating the site and getting that material cleaned up. So that is it is in the works, and the applicant is actively working on that.
Thank you. And I had, through you, Mr. Chair, my other question was, well, it had to do with Cataraqui Street being pretty narrow, and if anything was going to be done to like make it, if it was possible to make it wider. But I noticed that they spoke about opening up River Street, so that will actually probably mediate that problem. Also, is this, so since it's a brownfield, is this this for staff, is it under the municipal incentive program?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe this site is located in an area that could take advantage of the city's brownfields incentive programs, and that there is an application process for that that I don't believe has been initiated yet, but that this site would qualify. And with respect to Cataraqui Street, there were no recommendations as part of the transportation impact study regarding the width of Cataraqui specifically. It was River Street was primarily the focus in the technical review because it's a street that isn't currently up to municipal standards. So the townhouses fronting onto River Street would require that street to be brought up to a specific standard. It's not currently fully paved. And as well, the intersection to be opened with Rideau Street was identified specifically as something that was needed to lessen pressure on other intersections.
Thank you. Yeah, I drove on River Street today just to take a look, and yeah, it's not very good condition. Thank you.
Councillor Shaves, go ahead.
Thank you. Touched on it, this is a brownfield area, and this development is being done in 2 stages. So just to confirm, will the brownfield cleanup be done at the beginning before any development is actually done? Because I am concerned of it being partially done for the first phase and then people living there and then doing the second phase.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, I understand from checking in with our environment division that technically proposals can proceed in phases for records of site condition when there are individual lots created. But in this case, the final plan of subdivision approval conditions in front of the committee do require that record of site condition prior to the final plan of subdivision approval. So I believe we would be looking for that record of site condition before either of the phases could be initiated.
So you're saying there is a possibility that only partial of the lot will be cleaned up before finishing the rest of the development?
In this case, we have approval conditions before the committee that are recommended that would require that record of site condition before either phase. So in this case, we're looking for that record of site condition up front.
Okay. Mr. Barr.
Mr. Barr.
Thanks. Just one additional thing to add there. So with draft plan of subdivision approvals, Applicants can phase their final approval. So there could be a phase 1 and a phase 2 associated with this. So if they chose, they could initiate phase 1 and do all of the record of site condition work for that phase in order to enact that final plan of subdivision, leaving the phase 2 to have the same process follow it. It's a common practice with draft plan of subdivisions that we see in other parts of the city where they'll get approval for their larger area and then bring each phase on through final plan of subdivision at a subsequent time when the market is there. Mr. Leclerc, do you have anything additional to add?
Thank you, Mr. Varn, through you, Mr. Chair. I would just add that the applicant is effectively waiting for the environmental information and a plan to remediate the site in consultation with the Ministry of the Environment in order to clean up the site. So while it's possible that in proceeding with phases, an RSC might not be received for phase 2 when phase 1 comes online. So phase 1 might get its RSC and get building permits while phase 2, the RSC is still going through the process. The applicant is not going to proceed with building on phase 1 while there are piles of debris on the site. So the RSC, the environmental process, the plan that they'll develop in consultation with the Ministry of the Environment will give them the information that they need in order to clean up the site and effectively tidy it up and ensure that it meets, it doesn't generate the concerns and complaints that have been received thus far from the community. And the applicant himself has expressed, I think, multiple times that he'd like to get it cleaned up. So once that environmental plan is in place, the cleanup, at least on the surface, will commence very quickly.
Okay, because I'm just thinking about residents of the first phase and current surrounding residents. Okay. My next couple of questions and concerns are going to be surrounding the townhomes, my history with townhomes, especially within my district. The first being tree planting, because I understand by the bylaw, the 1 tree per every 3 townhomes. I know the way you have been setting it. By design, you have 2 driveways side by side, which leaves basically 2 front yards. So I'm going to guess there's going to be 1 tree between the two homes. And I've just experienced this confirming with planning regards to a recent subdivision, which was supposed to be planted trees every other home and everything. But however, there was an oops by the developer that the infrastructure was placed in the wrong location, which prevents from putting trees in the front yard. And I've also heard in other areas of my district, well, the front yard's not large enough to put a tree in. So I just want to ask that question. Is there going to be an oops? Or are there going to actually be trees within this development?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the standard and the requirement under the subdivision design guidelines is 1 tree for every 3 townhouses. The applicant has twinned the driveways to provide that sort of doubling of your front yards, as Councillor Chaves noted. That doesn't necessarily allow 1 tree for every 2 lots, because there is still the requirement for things like bell boxes, transformers, streetlights, other infrastructure within the street that takes up the room that might otherwise be provided by or taken up by trees. In this case, we have a number of corner lots. So the applicant will absolutely have to provide 1 tree for every 3 townhouses, and they won't have the option of doing an oops. That will be reviewed through the final plan of subdivision process. The trees themselves, the selection of the trees will be undertaken by an arborist, or a landscape architect, and then reviewed by the city's arborist. That will allow for the selection of trees that fit. So if there are any yards that are particularly tight, there are certain trees that can be selected that would fit those spaces and would be appropriate for those spaces. But we also have a number of corner lots. So what often happens is in those corner spaces, if there's challenges in the placement of trees within the internal sort of subdivision layout, those corner lots provide an opportunity to make up that difference. There's a long side yard where there's a lot more room to accommodate a number of different trees. And if the tree selection is undertaken very carefully and judiciously, given the site location, there's the opportunity to make up more trees in that way.
Again, with the recent experience I've had with this, and I'm talking within days, I guess there's also the opportunity if the residents are agreeable, and if a tree can't be put in the front yard, there is the ability, if the resident is agreeable, like I said, to have it put in their portion of the front yard or in their backyard. Would that be something to be considered?
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly. If it's not possible to accommodate the required number of trees in the front yards and in side yards, then rear yards will be explored as an option, and there are mechanisms through the final plan of subdivision process to register sort of additional requirements on title to those properties. In this case, we also have the condominium process, which is sort of another layer of requirement that can be accommodated. And there's also, for example, the visitor parking area. There's not a ton of room there, but there may be some room to accommodate a few extra trees there that might otherwise not be achievable.
Okay, and as long as the residents are told that if it's on their own private area, then they're financially responsible for it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, they would have restrictions on, for example, their ability to remove that tree without a particular process with the city, as well as, of course, maintaining it.
Okay. In regards to parking, I understand if there's going to be a secondary suite, there needs to be 2 spaces, one being the garage, one being the driveway. Garages nowadays tend to be a little on the tight side, and I noticed by the diagram that the vehicle is actually pulled over to the one side, so then the driver can get out. And I have experienced that personally in my own garage, but I've also experienced in speaking with tenants of secondary suites that not everyone uses the garage. They tend to use it for storage and not for storage of their vehicle. And they prefer to park in the driveway. And I've been told by residents of secondary suites that their main tenant told them they can't park in the driveway. So if I understand correctly from this development, there is no street parking on the private road. So there's going to be a possible runoff on parking on the side streets in the parking lots nearby, and or people are also how do I put this, inconvenient by having to park nose to tail and having to move cars back and forth when someone has to leave. So those do cause concerns to me, considering I've lived it within my own district, and not sure if anyone else has. Because these actually do happen, and I foresee that to happen here.
Thank
Sure,
you.
maybe I'll start, and
Go
then
ahead.
if staff would like to fill in and add anything, I would certainly welcome that. There's, I think, a few considerations here. One, the zoning bylaw allows and effectively encourages tandem parking in arrangements like this as a way of facilitating and allowing secondary units to be created. So this proposal complies with the number of required parking spaces for the units, for town, visitor spaces and secondary units and all that. So I think in this scenario that the councillor has described, where sort of the owner of a principal unit is using the garage for storage, they're parking themselves in the driveway, and they're telling their the occupant of their secondary unit that they have to park elsewhere, they would, as I understand it, be in violation of the zoning bylaw in not providing 2 parking spaces. At the end of the day, I think from our perspective, we really do rely on the zoning bylaw as the primary tool for facilitating this type of development and for facilitating sort of those standards, and at the end of the day, the behavior of individual owners, if they're not in compliance, is managed through other channels. I know that's not the most satisfying answer, but there's the subdivision has been laid out very much to comply with those standards that are present. I think the concern of the width of the parking garage, I think we explored in particular the ability of storing bikes in the garage and garbage and stuff, and the alignment of the vehicle sort of to the right of the garage is to allow that, both the owner, the driver of the vehicle, to get out, but also to ensure that there is room for those other items that would be necessary to for the owners of those different units.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would just add that in this context, I think that the proposal does strike a good balance between, it is technically providing the maximum number of parking that we would look for under the zoning bylaw for this unit type and the second residential unit combined. There is, in this context, there's quite a few transportation options. Although there isn't the parking available on the internal street, it's expected that in this context where there's express transit nearby, where there's the ability to bike to get to the central business district, that the space available for parking here strikes that balance that we're looking for in good planning.
Anyone else?
Thank you.
Okay, so I appreciate the answers and I understand we're following the minimum standards. However, that's on paper. And sometimes there's a difference between paper and reality. And I'm just trying to bring reality into the aspect because, like I said, number of different little subdivisions in my area, that comes into issue and causes parking issues, especially on-street parking. And to note that there's other avenues to deal with these issues if the main principal owner is not allowing the secondary parking. I would find it very difficult that a tenant of a secondary suite who lives with their principal owner and has the main entrance and common areas is going to take these other avenues to file a complaint. I just want to put it out there so people are understanding. I think overall, I appreciate the proposal, but in reality, it's going to be a couple of issues in the long run.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, okay, Mr. Barr, go ahead.
Thanks, and through you, Chair, just to jump in here as well. I think you're hitting on a difficult point and a good one, Councillor Shaves, because we can regulate and implement all these minimums, but human behavior is another thing. So even if someone does have a zone compliant property, or they can have 2 parking spaces on it, how they choose to function with their property is kind of beyond the scope of planning at this time, unless it becomes a bylaw or enforcement issue. But so long as they meet the minimums, these are opportunities afforded to them that we are looking to create through the planning approvals in order to increase housing in appropriate locations across the city. So it is a bit of a balance, and we are watching that to see how these suites are being implemented and the sites are being used, and see if we need to modify provisions or regulations in the future. But right now we have the ones that we have enacted before us and continue to implement. Mr. Park, I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Byrne. Through you, Mr. Chair. I think the other thing is to take into consideration, these may not all be rental units. They may be intergenerational units for kids that have grown up, don't leave the house, but you can give them a unit. So hopefully you don't have the same potential issues in those situations. So we do have to keep an open mind, but we are aware of the situations out there that can lead to this.
Thank you. And like I said, I do appreciate all this. I understand it is the minimum requirements. We are doing those. We maintain those. It's just similar to with traffic safety. We can put all the minimums and calming measures out and everything else, but basically it comes down to drivers following the actual and obeying the traffic act, which we can't control either. So I just want to bring those points out. So thank you very much.
Anyone else from the committee? Seeing none, we'll move to the public. If there's anybody from the public, Mr. Sullivan, please let us know.
So I can confirm that there is no one left in the Memorial Hall, so we don't have to go to there for members of the public. There are currently 3 members with their hands up, so I will first look to Lindsay Pilon.
Seko Lee, can you hear me? Yeah, Seko Lee, Lindsay Pilon Yukiat, Anuel Nawakiatalot, Oniotaka New Hunchiot, Sandra Niyukiat Hulna, Ruby Niyukiat Sexot. Good evening, and through you, Mr. Chair, I introduce myself and my maternal birthright language of Oneida, and I am proud to work with the Kingston Native Center and Language Nest just down the way from this proposed development on 610 Montreal Street. But I would like to be clear that I am speaking to you tonight as an individual, as a mother who used to own property on Orchard Street and currently rents at 2 Orchard Street. My question number 1 for Amy Didrikson or to the developer, sorry, my shorthand isn't what it would be, but you said something to the effect of, it's understood that putting units in low vacancy areas improve affordability rates, and that's just not my understanding. I'm not a market analysis, but I would like some clarification on where those numbers come from. Question 2, in regards to the traffic impacts discussion, if anyone's been at Leahurst College during pickup or drop off, you'll note, or even during the high traffic delivery periods at Sentient Colors Factory, how in good conscience can you uphold this development as offering opportunities for active transit when opening River Street may well invite a staggering amount of unrelated traffic off of Montreal Street? In my opinion, as someone who frequently walks and bikes and has small children on these streets, the increased neighborhood traffic will make it much more treacherous to access the K&P Trail. Emma Martin Park on the east side of Orchard Street doesn't even have a sidewalk on that east side. To my prepared points, anyone with even a passing familiarity with the North Kingstown secondary plan knows how direly the city struggles to initiate meaningful dialogue with urban Indigenous communities. And I'm not trying to be unpleasant or take pot shots. Tim Park himself said at the most recent NKT consultation, secondary plan phase 2 technical studies at the Broom Factory, we were not very good at what we were doing. And he was talking about the phase 1 of the consultation process. And I couldn't agree with him more. Having one Indigenous community member on the consultation team doesn't cut it, because our nations operate as collectives in attempts to achieve consensus. At that meeting, I asked of that committee what in their plan spoke to treaty obligations on a personal or professional level. And I'll pose a similar question here. My question 3, where in this plan are you observing treaties and Aboriginal rights, Indigenous law, and where are you acting to improve Aboriginal Crown relations as recommended in the Business and Reconciliation section of the 94 Calls to Action of the Truth and Reconciliation Report? Again, I'm speaking tonight as an individual, and I want to paint a quick picture for you of this site. The popular colonial narrative around these old industrial sites is that they're dead zones of no use for anything but development. Couldn't be further from the truth. I've walked through the area before, chasing after my cat, Daphne. There are rabbits, skunks, raccoons, foxes, turtles, crows, blue jays, cardinals, yellow finches, owls, hawks. There's jewelweed, there's wild grapes, there's wild carrot, there's red staghorn sumac, there's yellow dock, there's thistles, there's clover, there's plantain, there's poplar, there's maple. There's many, many more species, including insects, fungi, mosses, and lichen, of which I'm unfamiliar. It is a stunning little corridor of biodiversity extending from the Bell Island waterfront. If our neighbors want pollinators to continue to visit and prompt their gardens to grow, their flowers to bloom, we should be working to expand these areas of green oasis within our city. Question number 4, how will this development act to mitigate the loss of biodiversity? I'm gratified to hear councillors pose questions and concerns about trees, native species, and to whose regard they're being planted. We will be losing mature trees providing shade and cooling a significant stretch of Montreal Street. Landscape architects and city arborists are not relying on Indigenous ways of knowing, and that gives me a good deal of concern. Because this proposed development is occurring on a brownfield and in an area with unacceptable levels of chromium, my understanding is chromium isn't an issue when it remains in the ground, but when disturbed, when excavated, can become hazardous to health when encountered or inhaled through dust. I'm thinking of a busy construction site, a construction street where dust is becoming airborne, tracked down machinery, spreading, and will further spread, puddling into surrounding soils and waterways through the runoff rainwater. Students of Leahurst College, local families, pets at the park playing, even customers at the nearby Tula Cafe. I'm concerned about our health and our wellness. There's been some mention of the challenge of picking up dangerous materials. I'm concerned of the inevitable increase in dangerous garbage on our street. Daily, already, I'm picking up rusty screws and nails, scrap metals that pose concerns to cyclists, strollers, people who use mobility aids. Whoever currently owns or maintains this property seems unconcerned about its maintenance at the moment. So personally, I'd like to sound the alarm about what I can perceive as only exponentially growing risk of hazards. About these provincial requirements, I need more information. My question, how will I be given information and notice in order to make informed consenting decisions about my personal health and wellness? I have to wonder, who on earth do the planners expect to come live here should this development proceed? How many units will be geared to income housing? Sorry, that's been covered, which our neighborhood dearly needs. If you are looking to entice young professional families, someone should probably let them know that there are staggering wait lists of up to 2 years for daycare spots. They should start planning now. And the local school for those two addresses is Molly Brant Elementary. It's a school with enthusiastic and dedicated staff serving desperately low income and high needs neighborhoods, a schooling community fighting intergenerational poverty, food insecurity, low literacy rates, low graduation, and low employment rates. To my mind, we ought to work to improve the quality of life for people who already live in the area before we try and attract more. But again, I'm not a land developer. My question, what kind of tenants do you expect to live here and how will they mesh with the existing social infrastructure and systems? And lastly, on the topic of quality of life, I'd like to know if the proposed development will contribute to the stated goal of the City of Kingston to reduce carbon emission by building net zero buildings and disallowing further natural gas hookups. Yawa, thank you for listening.
Thank you.
I next recognize Jennifer McCluskey.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Thank
Yes,
you.
we can hear you.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the Planning Committee and the public. My name is Jennifer McCluskey and I reside at 8 Orchard Street. I'd like to take a moment and share with you some of my concerns regarding the proposed development at 5-7 Cataraqui Street. For many years, the vacant properties at 5-7 Cataraqui Street have been neglected by the owner developer. It has been over 2 years since a fire took place on this, on the property of the former petroleum, crude oil, and gasoline site, and nothing has been done to clean up the property since. The debris was sorted a year after the fire. However, the piles of concrete to this day still litter the property, which is an unsightly image for our community and our city. Nothing has been done to clean up this area and remove the debris. We work hard in this community to take care of our neighborhood and our neighbors. No concern, safety, or compassion on the welfare, well-being, and beautification of our neighborhood and community has been displayed by the applicant. As outlined in the recommendation report provided to the Planning Committee on September 1st, 2023, the applicant, I apologize, the summary of the public input was included from the public meeting, which was held on February 17th, 2022. On page 342 of the report, a question was asked regarding concerns of the long-standing piles of debris on the property and remains of former buildings. The response highlighted in the report states the applicant has indicated that they have made an effort to tidy the site and will pursue further removal of construction waste in the future. However, it's been over 19 months since the public meeting and no cleanup has happened and no communication with the community. The remnants of the former buildings, garbage, discarded and populated encampments, additional waste from inhabitants, human and wildlife, and illegal dumping have engulfed this site. I encourage members of the community to come visit and view the site, and you will understand our concern, frustration, and sense of hopelessness as we continue to improve the appearance of our community and neighborhood. Members of the community and City Council have worked hard to put this area on the Kingston map for people to visit and enjoy, and we are concerned that the continued lack of regard, responsibility, and lack of care will continue to be evident from the development of this site. I'd like to talk a little bit about traffic concerns. The current infrastructure on Orchard Street and Cataraqui Street is at full capacity in terms of the physical and organizational structures of facilities for this area. The applicant states on page 392 of the report that there will be no adverse impacts on road network as a result of the traffic generated by the proposed residential development. The following information highlights my concerns. Currently, there is only one way to access Orchard Street and River Street, and that is by turning off Rideau Street onto Cataraqui Street. Cataraqui Street is approximately 600 feet in length from the corner of Rideau Street to the corner of Orchard Street. The width of Cataraqui Street at the corner of Orchard Street is approximately 28 feet, with the width of Cataraqui Street at the corner of Rideau Street is approximately 27 feet, and in the middle of Cataraqui Street, which is near the former train tracks and the long debated discussion of the Wellington Street extension, is only approximately 21 feet in width. This location is where the applicant is proposing the access road from the Cataraqui Street to Orchard Street to support the development. Even with the developer's proposed reopening of River Street at Rideau Street, Cataraqui Street is far too narrow to support the additional increase in traffic. There are many businesses located on Cataraqui Street. The Woolen Mill at 46 Cataraqui Street houses more than 40 businesses. Tenants include architects, engineers, lawyers, catering, counseling, environmental, massage, technology, and education. This building draws in a lot of traffic daily from employees, visitors, and students with little parking available. There's one parking lot located to the north of the building and limited parking available at the south of the building. Some of these parking spaces have been allocated parking spots for employees of the former SNR building to use. The developer stated in the earlier public meeting in February 2022 that parking would be available for these proposed units at both locations, as well as street parking. However, both lots are full each day, as well as street parking is used. I would also like to add Cataraqui Street is very busy with minimal parking as students are being dropped off and picked up at Leahurst College, located in the Woolen Mill, which was mentioned earlier. Throughout the week, traffic is backed up as parents and guardians are lined up on Cataraqui Street trying to exit onto Rideau Street. It is not uncommon.
30 seconds left.
Oh, thank you. It's not uncommon for there to be as many as 10 cars lined up trying to exit. I also just want to talk about Orchard Street also experiences heavy traffic with Sensiate Color and business that has an average of 8 to 10 transport delivery trucks visiting the manufacturing site. As mentioned earlier, lots of people visiting the KP Trails, the Cataraqui Canoe Club, Emma Martin Park. We have difficulty with providing parking. As stated in the report, it is understood that on-street parking will not be a possibility on the internal private roadway or River Street due to the width of the road allowance. And I asked, does the same exception apply to Orchard Street regarding residents and visitors of the potential development parking on the street? Orchard Street is a very busy street, providing parking for those working, visiting, and using the space mentioned above. I end with
Thank you. If there's more, I recommend that you send it to the committee clerk or to the planner directly, because you've exceeded the 5 minutes. Okay. So there's a number of questions there.
Oh, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. There is still one other member with their hand up. I recognize Glenn Warwick. Oh, you're unmuted, Mr. or Mrs. Warwick. You may begin.
We are not hearing anything. There might be a microphone problem here.
Through you, Mr. Chair, what we can do, Glenn, if you could kindly email me. My email is isullivan@cityofkingston.ca, what you were planning on saying to the committee, and I can forward it to the committee and to the planners so that your opinions and your questions are received by staff. Just to give a couple more moments just to see if the mic works. And through you, Mr. Chair, they have removed their hand. So yes, please, Glenn, please send me your comments to my email. As I said before, it's also located on the City of Kingston website and on the agenda package as well. And I will forward it to the people that need to see it. Thank you.
Great. So can we have an answer to the questions that have been presented? Go ahead, Mr. Park.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to address the question Ms. Pilon raised. As it relates to development applications, there is no duty to consult in the constitutional sense. It's a private development. Similarly, there is no requirement under the Planning Act to provide notice to prescribed Indigenous nations. In this case, because there is no site within 1 kilometer of the proposal. That being said, Ms. Belon is absolutely correct. At the North Kingstown secondary plan meeting, I did publicly state, and I still publicly state this, we're not doing a very good job. And as a result of that, planning staff are currently coordinating with Heritage Services on developing a new framework for Indigenous engagement, including a broader public consultation framework, which is intended to be applied consistently going forward and avoid ad hoc approach to engagement with urban Indigenous communities. So I hope that does give her some sense of we are looking into this matter. We are going to bring forward a way to address these concerns, and it's not out of not wanting to. It's just making sure we have the right process in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Any of the other questions on traffic, tenants, carbon emissions, and reduction in biodiversity?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I'll start, and I saw Yuko put his hand up as well, but I can start to begin to answer some of the questions I've written down in my notes here. I think one of the first questions was questioning the affordability, a comment about introducing units into a low vacancy market based on just a general understanding of affordability when there is a low vacancy market, and introducing additional units, bringing down the supply and demand. I guess those criteria, the costs may come down, introducing additional units into the market, which is what we are trying to do through creating additional housing overall as a goal in the city. But in this case, the affordable component being also the important component being the 1-bedroom units that are proposed in the basement levels, which are a compact and an affordable form of housing that could be encouraged in this case. A second question, or the second point I had written down from Ms. Pilon related to impacts to intersections in the area and potential impacts to KMP Trail. The traffic impact study looked in detail at the intersections in the area, and it was because of one specific intersection and the level of service being affected, I believe in this case, because of the units that the opening of River and Rideau Street was recommended as a measure to mitigate the traffic levels in the area. And of course, we have folks in our transportation department that look at these studies in detail, and we'll be working through the more detailed design and how the KNP Trail will integrate with River Street once that's brought up to municipal standards, so that that can be worked in with the existing active transportation infrastructure in the area. In terms of biodiversity, this part of the city on this site, we do map natural heritage features and areas in the city, significant woodland and contributory woodland, and significant areas to protect through development that often triggers additional study. In this case, there weren't any natural heritage features identified on this site. But understanding that there are a number of trees, and that will be addressed through replacement requirements through the tree bylaw, and we'll of course look to enhance the canopy as much as possible through the street tree plantings and rear yard plantings where we can. In this case, I heard a question about chromium and public health and safety around when dealing with a contaminated site like this. And just to reiterate that a cleanup of this site is subject to provincial requirements, and the record of site condition is posted on a publicly available website. I believe it's called the Environment Registry, that's managed by the province, so that people can see the resulting record of site condition and the levels that that need to be met in those cases. In terms of quality of life and green building net zero features, the building code does require a certain level of energy efficiency. Beyond that, there's features are generally at the discretion of applicants, but we certainly encourage those through the process, just based on the location of the property and proximity to commercial uses and the walkability and transit accessibility of this area. We encourage developments of this form so that residents can make use of sustainable forms of transportation and hopefully reduce the reliance on automobiles versus a development on the outskirts of the city that would require more greenhouse gas heavy transportation. I believe many of the questions that I have written down related also to the piles of debris on the property that that will be cleaned up in due course. Of course, there's competing considerations in this case when materials do need to be removed from the site in accordance with provincial requirements. I understand that the storage of the materials on the site is not contrary to any sort of environmental regulations, but as well, they could be removed in accordance with provincial regulation as well, but it can be quite expensive. So the applicant may be choosing to pursue the removal of the materials when it's in future, and perhaps the applicant can speak further to the plans for that. I believe I've covered most of the questions, but I'm happy to speak to further questions if I haven't covered them all.
Mr. Leclerc.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Ms. Didrikson, I covered, I think, just about all the questions that I had noted down, but I did want to add in relation to the question from Ms. Pilon regarding the reduction of greenhouse gases and sort of aspirations of achieving net zero. And there's a few items I did want to speak to. One is that through the previous public meeting process, the applicant committed to providing electric vehicle charging stations and electric vehicle charging in the garages, as well as for spaces in the driveways and in the visitor parking. So there's sort of very much above and beyond any minimum requirements in that regard. The stormwater management design and plan for the entirety of the site does make use of some low impact development strategies, particularly in the form of rear yard swales and some side yard swales, which allows sort of a more natural sort of dispersion of stormwater flow and sort of returning that to the soil rather than directing it all through sort of engineered systems. And then the last item I think is related specifically to the zoning bylaw amendment, in that it allows the zoning bylaw amendment incorporates the ability to provide some sort of flexibility to allow a secondary unit. There's a minimum requirement of having one bicycle parking space provided, and the zoning bylaw amendment provides some flexibility in how that parking space, that bike parking space, can be provided, and again, encouraging alternative forms of transportation that don't rely on the automobile.
Okay, thank you. And so now it is time to look at the recommendation. If anybody here thinks that we should recommend this to council, I would like a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Giannani, Councillor Osanek, thank you. Discussion? Okay, let's call the vote. All those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thank you. Planning Advisory Committee meeting notes. Sorry. There's item C, Planning Advisory Committee meeting notes. Do we need what is this exactly?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can provide a quick background. So
Yes,
that
please.
is from the Planning Advisory Committee, which is run via the Planning Services. Chanty Birdie can also speak a little bit to this, but I can just speak from the procedure point of view for here. So they report roughly quarterly to the Planning Committee, and we just need a quick motion after any questions that the committee has on the content of the notes and the meeting that took place there, that the notes be received. So just a mover and seconder, and the motion will just be that the notes are received. Thank you.
So it's like an information report, we receive it. First,
Yes.
Does anybody in the committee have any questions? Glad to hear that it was so thorough. In that case, I will need a mover and a seconder to receive these notes. Councillor Glenn, Councillor Shaves, and now we receive them. Anybody who doesn't want to receive, say no. All the rest of us, put your hands up, please. And that passes unanimously. We have received the notes. Thank you. No new motions, no notices of motions, any other business? Seeing none. Correspondence has been seen in the addendum. The date of the next meeting is now for Thursday, September 28th, 2023. And I need an adjournment so that we can all go home. A mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Shaves, Councillor Osanek, all those in favor. And you are now free to turn off your computers.